Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 2801, The Soul-Searching Hand. Zen thought admitting he had killed her son would make her furious. Surprisingly, however, any resentment she did have seemed to disappear in the blink of an eye and she was calm again. The expression of the beautiful woman in red made Zen restless and uneasy. Something didn't feel right when he was captured by the old man in black. If the old man really wanted to kill him to avenge Marco's death, he could have done it on the Oneness Mountain and Zen would not have been able to fight back. If there really were people secretly protecting Zen, even they would not have been able to get to him in time. But the old man had brought him here. The people of the Vastness Mountain had to be up to something. Marco was my favorite son. You have to give me an explanation for his death, the woman said coolly. An explanation? Zen retorted, his eyebrows raised and his voice rife with derision. He tried to kill me on several occasions. This time, at the Ripple Pavilion competition, he lured me into the arena and tried to kill me again. If he wasn't so weak, I'd be dead. And now you want an explanation? Are you kidding me? Even if what you say is true, it's not you who died, but my son, she replied indifferently. It sounded somewhat reasonable. Marco had lost his life, while Zen stood here safe and sound. Relatively. It seemed rational enough that his mother had him brought here, wanting an explanation. Enough beating around the bush. What is that you want? Zen asked impatiently. The woman stood up and strolled gracefully to Zen's side. Her gaze was so sharp that it seemed as if she could see through him. Finally, she revealed her true intention. I heard that you stood out in the Seven Mountains meeting and showed extraordinary strength. It seems that your victory had something to do with the truth of godly way, right? Zen stood still and silent. The runes that Athamar created are all made of the imperial sword seals. Even if you are a genius capable of instant enlightenment, you should not have performed as you did. What did you rely on? She asked with a smile. Now Zen finally understood her purpose, she wanted the truth enlightenment. He sighed inwardly at her quick change in attitude. She didn't appear sad at all. It seemed that Marco's life or death didn't really mean anything to the Vastness Mountain. Zen was right. Eastern Emperor Tai had many concubines and even more direct descendants. So did the leader of Vastness Mountain. The Phoenix Palace had even more disciples than the Flow Sword sect. The ones in high regard were either those with incredible talent or those favored by Eastern Emperor Tai, and Elvinia was one of them. The Vastness Mountain was not much different. Yevon was born in the Shu clan of the Clear Lake and had stayed in the Bloom Divine Province for almost as long as Eastern Emperor Tai. He had been the head of the Vastness Mountain for countless years and had tens of thousands of sons. His sons had more sons still and these were all his direct descendants. Marco was one of Yevon's favorite sons, but still not as important as Elvinia was in the Phoenix Palace. I relied on my strength, Zen replied seriously. The woman focused her gaze tightly on Zen, a faint flicker of disappointment in her eyes. You're very strong. It really is quite impressive that you killed Laszlo, Drystan and Grayson on your own. However, Athamar's Imperial Sword Seal is very special. It's activated by the Truth Aura and has nothing to do with one's strength, she said, still smiling. She could not hide her motives anymore. I heard that there is a subsequent chapter to the Truth of Eternal Sword Intent, and it is the most important. But it has never been deciphered before. Now, it seems someone has indeed done it. Zen shrugged and looked at her dully. I don't know what you're talking about, he said flatly. Really? The woman stretched out her hand, and a piece of yellow paper appeared in it. On the paper were more than 20 words. Zen managed to catch a glance of the words, which happened to be the beginning of the truth enlightenment. He had already revealed 150 words of the truth enlightenment. Athamar, Winchell, Goran and Master Hai would give the chapter to their disciples. It shouldn't be difficult for the Vastness Mountain to get their hands on it. It had in fact taken a great deal of effort for the Vastness Mountain to procure the 20-odd words. Athamar, Winchell, Goran and Master Hai paid great attention to the truth enlightenment. Even though they had 150 words in their hands, they didn't reveal all of them at once. For example, Winchell only gave the 150 words to a few direct descendants of the Origin Mountain, while the elite disciples only had the 20-odd words. And the Vastness Mountain got the 20-odd words from some elite disciple. These 20-odd words are part of the subsequent chapter of the Truth of Eternal Sword Intent, but they're not enough. According to our research, there should be at least 1,000 or 2,000 words in total. And you have them, the woman said as she walked behind Zen. Hand over all of them and I will let you go. What do you think? Zen looked at her suspiciously. She wanted him to give her the complete truth enlightenment in exchange for her forgiveness. She must be out of her mind. The truth enlightenment was very important. It was after all part of the foundation of the Oneness Sky Palace. He would give it to the palace if the right opportunity presented itself. He had hoped to exchange the chapter for the support of the palace or maybe for the palace to support the Nine Li race. But this was definitely not the right time. The woman wanted the complete truth enlightenment just because Zen had killed her son. That was not a deal worth taking. It was me who deciphered the 20-odd words. After much restraint, Zen finally admitted it. The eyes of everyone in the room lit up, revealing their judgment was well placed. But I've only deciphered 150 words in total, and I've handed them to Master Athamar. If you want, I can write them down, Zen added. Since the 150 words had already been released, sooner or later, they would be passed down like the truth of eternal sword intent to the entire Oneness Sky Palace disciples, and even to all the humans. He didn't mind writing them down again. That's not enough, the woman said, staring intently at Zen with a devilish smile. I want the complete version. Zen shrugged his shoulders, embarrassed. That's not possible, I haven't deciphered the complete chapter myself. How can I give it to you? The woman shook her head and said, I don't believe you. There are only two ways for you to get out of this. Either you write down the complete version yourself, or... She flicked a glance at the men in black robes. One of the men stepped out of the line. A shadow appeared above his head, green mist rose and a green arm faintly materialized from it. It is another shore token from stage 17 of the other shore. It's called the soul-searching hand. He won't hurt your soul. However, he is able to shuffle through your memories, bit by bit, with the soul-searching hand, she said with a grimace. The godly ways such as the Great Dominance technique had little effect on the powerful other shore realm warriors. As long as Zen resisted, it would be difficult to search his soul. However, there were some other shore tokens that were able to deal with warriors' souls, and one of them was the soul-searching hand. In the face of the green soul-searching hand, Zen's face darkened. Chapter 2802, A Little Trick. Zen could trace hints of doubts in the faces of Athamar, Goran and others when he told them about the truth enlightenment. They also wanted to acquire all of the truth enlightenment, but they didn't want to force Zen by using the method of soul-searching. Since Zen said he only had 150 words, they believed what he said. But the Vastness Mountain people were different. The woman in red insisted on the complete version, and they didn't believe Zen when he said he had only deciphered 150 words. She had been preparing even before Zen's arrival. Have you made up your mind? Do you want to write the complete chapter down yourself or do you need us to use force? She stared at Zen with ice-cold eyes. Zen's brows furrowed as he remarked, I only have 150 words. It will take me years before I could decipher the whole thing. Even if I do, I will only give it to Eastern Emperor Tai and he will be the one to share it with the whole Oneness Sky Palace. You don't think he won't give it to the Vastness Mountain, do you? He wondered why the woman was in such a hurry. The woman ignored Zen. She swiftly turned to the man in black. Arjun, do it, she ordered. The man ran straight to Zen, and the green hand above his head charged towards him too. How could Zen agree? He had plenty of secrets, not just the truth enlightenment. His secrets included the Chaos Ancient God, the Divine Land, Jeffrey's talent in deciphering the Sanskrit words, the Nine Li race and so on. He would bring these secrets with him to his grave. Bang! Zen kicked the floor and abruptly flew backward. When he moved less than 10 feet, the woman waved her hand gently. Suddenly, Zen was back where he had been. Bang! Zen attempted to flee again. The trick repeated itself. Zen would barely reach 10 feet before he found himself back on the floor. Zen felt like there was an invisible force around him. No matter how hard he tried, he just kept spinning back to his spot. Young man, stop struggling, the woman said with a sinister smile. Arjun reached Zen and pressed him with his green hand. Zen felt anxiety spin in his stomach. Zen closed his eyes and the voice of number 9527 filled his consciousness. Don't worry, it's just the soul-searching hand. Let him do it. Do you have a solution? Zen asked. Of course, number 9527 answered positively. Just relax. He won't find anything. Number 9527 was a wisp of its master's soul. It didn't contribute to Zen's strength in battle, but it had endless methods to deal with one's soul. Hence, Zen felt relieved with its words of assurance. Of course, he still looked very nervous on the surface. Swoosh. As Arjun approached Zen, the soul-searching hand grabbed Zen's head. All of the 5 fingers sprawled neatly on his head. Zen felt a whirlpool stir inside him. The soul aura was coming straight to his mind. Inside him, number 9527 was also making its move. Zen started to feel numbness in his soul. His mind was slowing down. He stood blankly, allowing the soul-searching hand to interrogate him. Arjun wore an evil smile on his face. Green mist rolled on the surface of the soul-searching hand as it emitted a green glow. He was gradually sucking Zen's memories to the point that he would remember some of Zen's memories as his own. Have you found it? The woman asked Arjun. Do you need a brush and ink to write it down? Not yet, Arjun replied. Countless memories entered his mind. The memory of a beggar's life. A butterfly stuck in a spider's web. Even the evolution of a world. Arjun's face curled into a confused expression. From what he knew, a person's memories would be arranged chronologically as they occurred, from one's childhood to adulthood. But why were Zen's memories so haphazardly arranged? I find some special memory fragments, Arjun declared as he found some memory fragments with special shapes. Normally, he would ignore these and would only focus on acquiring what he needed to know. However, he wasn't able to find anything valuable in Zen's soul, so his attention was all on the memory fragments. He read the first memory fragment. Suddenly, a look of shock covered his face. Those were the first 10 odd words of the truth enlightenment. It seemed like the words were scattered across memory fragments for some reason. Arjun could not comprehend how and why that would happen, but he made sure to not let that chance go. He transferred Zen's memory fragments into his own soul and tried to read through them as if they were his own. As he was doing so, his eyes widened and his body began to tremble. His face suddenly turned ghostly pale. What? There are too many memory fragments. Dang it, Arjun began to talk nonsense. Arjun, what's wrong with you? The woman approached his trembling body. Other men in the room shared puzzled looks. Arjun wasn't the strongest among them, but he had the unique and important ability of the soul-searching hand. He had solved difficult problems in the past with that ability. What was his problem with Zen? Arjun dragged his own body away and retreated. After a few steps, he passed out and collapsed to the floor. Zen recovered to his normal state. When he saw Arjun lying on the floor, he let out a genuine gasp. Number 9527, what did you do? He asked in his mind. Arjun's soul was much stronger than Zen's. Even if number 9527 was a wisp of chaos ancient god's soul, it would take a whole lot of effort to cause Arjun to suffer that much. I didn't do anything special. He likes searching people's souls, right? So I simply overwhelmed him with countless memories. His soul wasn't able to handle so many, number 9527 said with a chuckle. At first, it resembled the chaos ancient god in character. Now, since it had been with Zen for a long time, its own self-consciousness had evolved. It started to gain unique character traits. The chaos ancient god himself would never use such a little trick. The memory fragments were a trap arranged by number 9527 on purpose. It wanted to fool Arjun into thinking there was important information in the fragments. The memory fragments covered a long timeline. Number 9527 made sure to include memories of the birth of chaos. Apart from the overwhelming quantity, the memories were also useless for humans as they did not have the ability to interpret them anyway. A human's feeble attempt to interpret them would cause immense pain to their soul. Chapter 2803, Emperor Gethin. As the saying went, a man whose heart is not content is like a snake that tries to swallow an elephant. Arjun had absorbed all the memory fragments into his mind and interpreted them. It wasn't an elephant that he had swallowed. It was much larger than that. A whale. A massive amount of memories poured out, raging at Arjun's soul. He fainted, unable to bear the weight of the memories. The woman in red glared at Zen and shouted, "What did you do to him?" Zen spread his arms out and shrugged, indicating that he hadn't done anything. The woman waved her hand, causing a loud bang to reverberate through the air. Zen felt like he had been hit by a heavy hammer. His body flew backward and crashed into the palace wall. Even through the pain, he wondered what material this palace was made of. The wall had only bent a little under such great force. Zen leaned against the wall, blood flowing from the corner of his mouth. The woman was so strong, she had managed to injure him a little despite the protection of the shade stone liquid. She looked coldly at him, although she was a little surprised as well. She had thought she could beat Zen into unconsciousness, but the blow had hardly made a difference, much to her surprise. "Lock him up," she ordered before turning around and leaving. Two men in black walked up to Zen and dragged him to the back of the palace. One of them stomped his feet, causing the floor of the palace to crack open. A large square hole appeared, and they threw Zen in. Zen didn't resist during the whole process. These people were much more powerful than him and he knew that it would be useless to resist. If he did, there would be serious consequences and he could get seriously hurt. Zen was unusually calm as he sat up cross-legged in the cave and began to heal himself. On one hand, the Vastness Mountain feared the Oneness Sky Palace. On the other hand, they also wanted to obtain the truth enlightenment. Going by this logic, Zen knew he was safe for the time being, but wasn't sure what they would do to deal with him next. He had managed to get through it this time with no 9527's help. But he might not make it the next time. "I wonder if Master Athamar or Master Gorin will come to save me," Zen murmured to himself as he stared at the dark cave wall. The woman in red left the gloomy palace and disappeared at the palace gate in the blink of an eye. Pillars formed by black iron swords sat atop the Vastness Mountain, holding a bluish-black palace amidst them. This was the center of the Vastness Mountain, the mighty Sword Hall. The woman appeared at the gate of this hall and quickly walked inside. The guards of the hall, on seeing her approach, knelt down in unison. "Good day, Lady Natasha. Nice to meet you, Lady Natasha." "Lady Natasha, Emperor Gethin doesn't want to see anyone at the moment." A mole sat on Natasha's forehead. Its maroon color made it look like blood was dripping down her forehead. The guards knew she was furious, but they had been instructed not to let anyone enter the mighty Sword Hall. They had no choice but to stop Natasha, even though they knew she was far above their station. Natasha was nettled. She waved a hand without even looking at them. They were sent flying backwards and fell to the ground with a heavy thud. A middle-aged man with a long beard sat on a large golden throne at the top of the mighty Sword Hall. He looked energetic, his eyes shining sharp as blades. This was Emperor Gethin, the head of the Vastness Mountain. Two black shadows stood beside Gethin. It was hard to see their faces in the dim light. One could only vaguely make out their human shapes. These two men were the leaders of the intelligence agency. They lowered their heads to whisper something to Gethin. Gethin raised his hand. The two men had already noticed the beautiful lady walk in and stepped aside to merge into the shadows. At the sight of Natasha's face, Gethin smiled gently and said, "Natasha, what makes you so angry? That brat refused to tell us anything. He says he will only give us 150 words." Natasha spat out angrily. Gethin stroked his long beard thoughtfully and then said, "What he says actually fits the information we first received." "He must be lying," Natasha said, her eyebrows shooting up. She actually wasn't sure if Zen had lied or not. People like Natasha usually insisted on getting what they wanted. So she had chosen to believe that Zen had lied to her. "So what if he lied? Didn't I send Arjun to help you?" Gethin asked. Natasha's eyes flashed at the mention of Arjun's name. "I don't know what trick the brat played. Everything went smoothly when Arjun was extracting his memories. But he passed out before he could find out anything useful. Zen's soul level was outstanding, but there was a huge difference between his soul and Arjun's, which was why Zen couldn't use his soul to attack Arjun." Natasha was puzzled at this and didn't know why Arjun had passed out. Gethin's expression cleared, pure interest taking its place on his face. "He caused Arjun to pass out. Interesting. Bring Arjun here." Natasha could do nothing but follow Gethin's orders. She asked her people to bring Arjun to Gethin. He was soon carried into the mighty Sword Hall. Gethin raised his hand slightly and the unconscious Arjun floated up slowly. He pointed a finger at Arjun, a ray of brown light shooting into his mind. He stirred and it wasn't long before he began to wake up. As he sat up and saw the man before him, Arjun was startled and then knelt down on the floor respectfully. "Greetings, Emperor Gethin," he said. "You have been using the soul-searching hand for many years, and you are already confident in its usage. Why can't you deal with a little guy who is still in the lust world?" Gethin asked calmly. When Arjun recalled what he had read in Zen's memories, his features convulsed back into shock. "That bloke is not human at all," he said, his eyes widening. "How could a person have so many memories?" There were too many memories in the fragments. One of the memories was watching the sun rise and fall for 10 billion years until the sun self-destructed. Zen was only over 100 years old. How could he have watched the sun rise and fall for 10 billion years? How could someone of this world do such a boring thing for so many years? Even the members of the stone race, which had a long history, and the members of the turtle race, which moved extremely slow, would not do such a thing. At Arjun's words, Gethin, Natasha, and even the two leaders of the intelligence agency in the shadows were astonished. How could there be such bizarre memories in this world? He has probably fused with a special other shore token. Maybe these weird memories belong to that token, Gethin said hopefully, after thinking for a while. Most other shore tokens held a certain number of memories. And despite the hope with which he was talking, Gethin had never heard of another shore token possessing such a massive amount of memories. The question is how we can make Zen speak. Natasha sighed. One of the two leaders of the intelligence agency suggested, there are many ways of making people talk, like using brutal corporal punishment. I don't think he can bear it. Chapter 2804, Searching the Mountain. The intelligence agency had plenty of tried and tested torture methods under their sleeves. They did not think that someone like Zen could withstand them. Natasha, however, disagreed. We already broke the rules when we took Zen to the Vastness Mountain, she said with a light shake of the head. If he gets tortured under our watch, I'm sure it would be a big deal. Just as Zen guessed, the people of the Vastness Mountain could only capture him, but they wouldn't dare to hurt him. Gethin waved his hand and said, we need to be careful. We can't just torture him. I think we should leave him to Barnaby. The Vastness Mountain was one of the top 3 among the 7 mountains. They were known as a force full of great talents. Barnaby was among them. He was a powerful man who worked for Gethin, and his other shore token possessed great power. It could penetrate an opponent's soul and send them into deep confusion. Compared to Arjun, Barnaby was much better. They would have better luck if they sought his help. But Barnaby is, Natasha muttered with a surprised look on her face. All right, invite him back, said Gethin with a glimmer in his eyes. We don't have much time left. This is a rare opportunity. Then, the tension in the room was disrupted by a muffled sound outside the Vastness Mountain. Bang! A loud noise similar to the sound of thunder erupted. Gethin and Natasha tensed at the sound of the muffled thud. A black-armed guard rushed inside the mighty sword hall. Emperor Gethin, he started as he knelt down in front of Gethin. 2 oneness governors are trying to destroy our mountain protecting array. It must be Athamar and Goran. Are they out of their minds? Natasha frowned. From the shadows, the voice of a man sneered, is it because we've been too modest recently? Are they really willing to go this far? How dare they break into the Vastness Mountain? Gethin's face darkened, his gaze turned stone cold. We must have underestimated Zen's importance to them. Natasha, quickly ask Barnaby for help. Yes, Natasha nodded as she ran out of the hall. Gethin turned to the guard in black. Remove the mountain protecting array, he ordered. Fetch the 2 oneness governors and take them here. Outside the Vastness Mountain, bright light covered the sky. Upon careful observation, one could see that thousands of long swords glittered the heavens. This was the protecting array of the Vastness Mountain. This array was powerful, but the 2 men that hovered were not going to back down so easily. Athamar spread his long arms and a huge seal covered his back. It was the original imperial sword seal. Behind Athamar, over 100 long swords floated. When he activated the truth of eternal sword intent, the original seal on his back released many rays of large sword radiance, each extremely powerful. Boom, 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 a ray of sword radiance flew right into the mountain. It trembled as its protecting array was harmed. Beside him, Goran held a long sword. He quietly tried to sneak an attack. His eyes shone like torches. Each time the mountain trembled in weakness, Goran waved his sword. The sword strike caused immense pressure to the array. Athamar and Goran were oneness governors. It was unwise of them to attack the protecting array of the Vastness Mountain directly. But they needed a quick way to rescue Zen. He was of great value to them, after all. He was the only one who had deciphered the truth enlightenment. His special knowledge made him extra special to their group. Just now, they politely requested to see Gethin outside the Vastness Mountain. But the guards merely answered no. They said that the mountain was closed and no outsider was allowed to enter it. With great rage, Athamar caused further damage to the Vastness Mountain as he continued to attack it. Bang, buzz, buzz, buzz. The mountain protecting array shook violently. Only a few hits and it would surely be destroyed. Then, an armed guard ran towards them. Stop, he shouted with a pleading voice. Don't attack the array anymore. Emperor Gethin agreed to meet you. Then, the light faded as the array was removed. Athamar put away the imperial sword seal, with his head held high. Goran also put away his long sword. He smiled and said, we already did so much harm to the mountain. I'm sure Gethin is furious. I doubt the negotiation would go smoothly. Athamar stood his ground firmly. As long as he hands over Zen, then things are fine. Otherwise, get ready to fight. Goran shook his head. Athamar was acting like a typical member of the Flow Sword sect, stubborn and rash. But Goran knew that even if they worked together, they would not be strong enough to win against the Vastness Mountain. The two of them rushed towards the mountain top and entered the mighty sword hall. Athamar tried to conceal his anger with a curt smile. "Greetings, Emperor Gethin," he greeted as he reached his hands out. Oneness governors were normally perceived as inferior to a mountain master. However, Oneness governors were conferred by Eastern Emperor Tai himself. Because of that, they were considered powerhouses. They did not have to humble themselves too much in front of Gethin. Gethin sat on the golden throne. He ignored Athamar's salute and instead slapped his hand on the throne's armrest. "That is the way how you greet me? By trying to destroy my mountain protecting array?" Gethin's attitude amused Goran, but Goran tried his best to maintain a serious face. He knew that Gethin was being exaggerated. Athamar didn't buy his reactions as well. "Well, I didn't come here for niceties as well. We know Zen is here and we merely want to rescue him. Your mountain protecting array was obviously in the way, so I did what I had to do. We hope you could forgive us." Athamar could tell that Gethin was merely stalling for time. "Forgive you? Why would I forgive you so easily?" Gethin sneered. Athamar remained unfazed. "I don't care whether you forgive me or not," he remarked. "Just hand over Zen today. Let's deal with the damages next time." Gethin was sensing just how significant Zen was to them. He knew they wouldn't give up without a fight. He just didn't expect Athamar to be so rude. With a straight face, Gethin said, "Zen is not here. You must have come to the wrong place." "Don't lie, I know he's here. If we search the mountain, I'm sure we can find Zen," Athamar insisted. "Search the mountain?" Gethin's face grew red with fury. A terrifying aura filled the mighty sword hall. He said in a sinister tone, "The Vastness Mountain is as old as the Oneness Sky Palace. I've lived far longer than Eastern Emperor Tai in the Bloom Divine Province. No one dares to threaten me like that. No one is allowed to search my territory." Goran tried to keep a straight face, but Gethin's strong aura was starting to suffocate him. "Well," Athamar sneered, "I guess today's an exception." Chapter 2805, Unexpected Guests. Zen sat in the dark cave. The lid above opened once again, allowing a ray of light to pierce through from above. "Come up," a strange voice whispered from the entrance of the cave. Zen, who sat cross-legged, turned a deaf ear to the voice. Phew, an invisible force drew Zen up from the bottom of the cave and he fell into the palace with a thud. Pushing himself to his feet, he found Natasha standing not far off. He smiled at her and said, "We meet again." Zen's fearlessness upset Natasha to her core. Athamar and Goran had arrived at the Vastness Mountain too soon. Time was running out. Barnaby had been practicing on the other shore. Natasha had forced him to leave it for now to join her. "Barnaby, we need your help. But don't kill him," Natasha called out. A tall, thick man appeared from behind Natasha. He was dressed in a white robe, with eyes drawn on it. The eyes seemed embedded in the robe and were unnervingly real. "Don't worry, Lady Natasha. He is just a young man in the lust world," Barnaby said with a slight smirk. She wanted to remind him of what had happened to Arjun, but given his cultivation base and strength, she thought he should have no difficulty in dealing with Zen. Zen tensed up with caution when he saw Barnaby. Arjun, one of the best warriors at the chaotic source realm, had been very powerful in Zen's eyes. But he was unable to figure out Barnaby's real strength. He figured Barnaby was probably as strong as Athamar. Barnaby smiled nicely as he walked up to Zen, which was very disconcerting. Once a creature is born, it will have its memory. But it's only a dream. Just relax. This can be very easy. As he spoke, 7 eyes on his white robe snapped open. They didn't look like eyes on a robe anymore, they looked real. Zen looked into them and a trance immediately overtook him. "Oh no, don't look into the eyes." Zen's heart seized as he closed his eyes as fast as he could. When they were closed, everything else disappeared but the eyes. They kept coming closer and closer. "It's useless, Zen, it's the illusory eyes. Closing your eyes won't help," said number 9527. "Then what should I do?" Zen asked anxiously. His techniques and understanding in the soul level were quite limited. The flow swordsmanship may help you resist them, but unfortunately, you haven't fully mastered it yet. This is troublesome. You can try the authentic visual world, number 9527 suggested. Number 9527 knew how to deal with those as powerful as Arjun, but it couldn't defeat a powerhouse like Barnaby. It could only offer ideas. I can create the happiest illusion, and make the fragile strong. This new world will be amazing for you, Barnaby whispered gently, as if Zen was a close friend he cared for greatly. Zen still wore the same dreamy look on his face. It was as if he had returned to the divine land and established a new great clan in the center of the time sea. He no longer pursued ultimate power and never experienced hardships. Natasha's lips curled into a sneer. You're indeed an amazing master, Barnaby. This stubborn man is no match for you. Barnaby paid her words no mind and turned to look at her. He smiled and lifted a finger to shush her. Lady Natasha, please don't make a sound. It will be done soon. Suddenly, Zen opened his eyes, and the demonic eye in his inner world was activated. A white light flashed in his right eye. All the illusions shattered into pieces. He was no longer in a trance and his eyes cleared. That was close. I was almost trapped. Zen broke out in a cold sweat. The faces of Natasha and Barnaby froze. Barnaby stared at Zen, full of disbelief and confusion. Even the powerful masters at the chaotic source realm who had stepped into the desire world found it impossible to break his illusions. How could Zen, who had just stepped into the lust world, accomplish it? Barnaby, what's going on? Natasha asked. She didn't know how much longer Gethin could stall. Time was running out, there was no room for error. It's just a small hiccup, Barnaby said, sizing Zen up. He probably has another shore token capable of destroying the illusions. Another shore token of that kind was very rare. Barnaby was startled to learn Zen had one. What should we do? Natasha asked, frowning intensely and staring at Zen. Don't worry, Barnaby reassured her confidently. He then slowly lifted his white robe. The eyes on it opened one after another. Inside the mighty sword hall, a powerful aura filled the air. Gethin still sat in his golden throne, like a slumbering dragon, ready to devour anything that dared disturb him. Black fog began gradually spreading from the shadows beside him, the killing intent wandering along it. Suddenly, two leaders of the intelligence agency appeared. Athamar, life has been too smooth for you these past years. It seems you have forgotten who you are. Gethin flared with anger. I'd like to see how you managed to walk out of here today. Sensing the killing intent in the black fog, Gorin was on high alert and more cautious than ever. If Gethin really took action, Athamar and Gorin would be too weak to fight back. Just then, another person could be heard walking in from outside the mighty sword hall. He had a pair of bright piercing eyes. It was none other than Winchell of the Origin Mountain. Gethin laughed grimly when he saw Winchell. Oh, the Origin Mountain wants to get involved too? He asked, sniggering. Winchell cupped his hands to Gethin and said, Gorin is my best friend. I have to stand by his side and help if I am needed. It's not enough. It's far from enough for the three of you to do anything here, said Gethin, shaking his head. Although Winchell was not a oneness governor, he was almost as strong as Athamar and Gorin. But they were far from being able to contend with Gethin, even if they worked together. Moreover, there were countless masters in the vastness mountain. The two leaders of the intelligence agency, for example, were not weak. Is it enough if I join them? An old voice asked. A stooping old woman came in from the door of the mighty sword hall, clutching a thin walking stick. Grandma, slow down, Dorothy said, holding the old woman by her arm as she walked her in slowly. When Gethin saw the old woman, the corners of his eyes twitched. Gethin had decided that nothing and no one would stand in his way of getting the truth enlightenment. However, the old woman's arrival had startled him to be sure. This was going to be a tough situation. Chapter 2806, Madame Yasemin. Both Athamar and Gorin were surprised to see the old lady. Their eyes lit up with delight. As soon as Callum informed Athamar that Zen had been abducted, and by whom, Athamar had gone to Gorin to ask him to accompany him to the vastness mountain. Gorin immediately agreed. Before leaving, he went to Winchell to tell him of Zen's abduction too. What happened next was completely unexpected. To the astonishment of Gorin and Athamar, Winchell didn't come alone. He had brought the head of the Origin Mountain with him. The Origin Mountain was headed by Yasemin, whose power was second only to that of Eastern Emperor Tai, the great leader of the Oneness Sky Palace. Yasemin herself held an important position in the Oneness Sky Palace as well. It was generally known that the stature and glory of the Oneness Sky Palace could be attributed, in part, to the efforts of Yasemin. Indeed, many said at least half of the credit for all the achievements of the Oneness Sky Palace should go to Yasemin. I didn't expect that Madame Yasemin would take an interest in a disciple of the Flow Sword sect, Gethin said, stepping down from the golden throne. He went to Yasemin and reached out a hand to support her. The old lady grunted, ignoring Gethin's help. No need, Yasmin said, making her way towards the throne. Yevon cursed her inwardly, but he forced a smile and followed behind Yasmin. After a few moments, Dorothy helped Yasmin to take her seat on the golden throne. Yasmin sat, exhaling heavily. Then she bent and used her long, thin stick to poke the golden engravings around the throne. Cracks formed on the ground where her stick touched it. Don't hide now, you two little jerks. Come out. There was a puffing sound. Two people staggered out of the shadows where they had been hiding, falling to the ground. They were two leaders of the intelligence agency. As soon as they were exposed, they scrambled to their feet and bowed to Yasmin, not daring to show the slightest hint of disrespect. Although most of the people in the Oneness Sky Palace had never even seen Yasmin, everyone had heard of her legend. The thin walking stick she always carried around was her weapon. It was called the Gliding Dragon Sword. She was famous for many outstanding feats, including the creation of the Origin swordsmanship. At one time she had capably guarded the Dragon Cliff alone. People still spoke with awe of how she had killed in one strike a powerful master who lived many provinces away, using the Origin deity attack. Many thought of her as the hero who stabilized chaos. Moreover, her other sure token was a strengthening type. It had no special ability, but it contained incomparably massive divine megatons of force. Anyone who met her was struck by the formidable impression she made on others. Thus, although she looked like a weak old woman on the verge of death, her reputation always preceded her, and everyone went to great lengths to treat her with the proper respect. Yasmin didn't waste time with small talk. Hand Zen over. She ordered from her perch on the golden throne. Yevon took a deep breath. He had no choice. Even though Yasmin was legendary and the head of the Origin Mountain, he could not give in and just hand Zen over without a fight. He decided to try dissembling first. He gave her a wry smile and said, "Madam Yasmin, you have just arrived here. Don't you want to talk about it? What makes you so sure that Zen is even here?" Yasmin was unmoved. "I don't need to explain anything to you. I repeat, hand Zen over now. I don't care what your reasons were for abducting him." She looked coldly at Yevon, daring him to defy her. She was used to dominating everyone around her, and Yevon was no exception. Yevon wasn't immune to the pressure. Indeed, if it had been about anyone else, Yevon might have acquiesced to Yasmin's request. However, he couldn't this time. This was about the truth enlightenment. "I apologize, Madam Yasmin, but I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm afraid I cannot hand over someone we don't have," Yevon said, forcing his voice to stay calm. Athamar, Goran and Winchell exchanged glances. They knew he was lying, but couldn't imagine why he would dare to lie to Yasmin. It seemed that Yevon was absolutely determined to obtain the truth enlightenment. Or was this about something else? Was there some other plot involved? They wondered what would happen if Yevon kept arguing with Yasmin. Yasmin snorted. "I don't care about your denials. Winchell, go and search the Vastness Mountain for Zen," she ordered. Winchell snapped to attention. "Yes, Madam Yasmin," he said. Yevon was losing his cool. Dropping some of his deference, he said coldly, "Madam Yasmin, this is not reasonable at all. We are not responsible for anyone you might be looking for. Is the Origin Mountain superior to the Oneness Sky Palace? Do you have the right to impose your will on us?" The 7 mountains were the alliance formed by Eastern Emperor Tai. No one could command all 7 mountains except Eastern Emperor Tai, who was the leader of the alliance. Although Yasmin had incredible strength and could probably go head-to-head with Eastern Emperor Tai in terms of ability, she still had no power to violate the rules of the alliance. She was overstepping her authority. What would the heads of the other mountains think when they heard what Yasmin had done in the Vastness Mountain? At Yevon's words, a slight look of hesitation appeared in Yasmin's wrinkled face. Dorothy pursed her lips. She thought, Yevon is truly cunning. What he said is true, and that will make it harder for Grandma to deal with him. But we can't give up on Zen. She wore a look of anxiety as she wondered where exactly Zen was and what had happened to him. Athamar and Goran also understood the import of Yevon's words and felt worried. They hadn't expected him to have the nerve to stand up to Yasmin like that. There was a sudden blast of sound. 2 people appeared in front of the mighty sword hall, moving too quickly to be identified by the naked eye. Yevon and the 2 leaders of the intelligence agency felt a surge of tension, worried about who were coming. They wished no more people would get involved in this. Chapter 2807, The Edict of Eastern Emperor Tai. Since Athamar's arrival, more and more people had been coming to Vastness Mountain to look for Zen. All who came were strong, respected warriors of high ranks. Yevon stared at the newcomers, wondering who they were. Yevon scowled inwardly. Had he known that so many would be coming, he would have ordered the activation of the mountain protecting array. As the two people came to a stop at the gate, he took a deep breath, fortifying himself. Like Gethin, everyone was watching the newcomers at the gate of the hall. One of them was none other than Master Hai, who was in charge of distributing the flags in Dragon City. Master Hai didn't intimidate Gethin, but unfortunately, he was not alone. Next to Master Hai stood a beautiful lady wearing a purple dress and a disarming smile. It was Flamen. By now, Gethin was totally confused. Who was Zen? Why was he so significant? Wasn't he just a disciple of the Flow Sword sect? Both the Origin Mountain and Eastern Emperor Tai had sent representatives for him, which Gethin found deeply unsettling. Why? What made Zen so special? Flamen, still smiling, floated in the air, her ribbon fluttering in the wind. She looked like a lovely fairy from a classic painting. She flew towards them, saying lightly, "That young man is always involved in some kind of trouble, isn't he? What has he done to Vastness Mountain? Why did you take him?" As she entered, everyone present greeted her, including Athamar, Gethin, Gorin and the leaders of the intelligence agency. Dorothy gave her a prim salute, and Yasemin gave her a curt nod. After all, Flamen was the favorite concubine of Eastern Emperor Tai. She was now the only person who could meet with him. Gethin sighed. Flamen's arrival and her status as Tai's favored concubine signaled the end of his resistance. He wondered whether Barnaby had already taken action. Had he obtained the truth enlightenment? Flamen flew to Yasemin and landed beside her, by the throne at one end of the mighty sword hall. A golden token materialized in Flamen's hand. She held it up and spoke loudly, "This is an edict from Eastern Emperor Tai. Gethin, you are commanded to release Zen immediately." Gethin stared at her, the wheels turning in his head. The edict was unequivocal, but perhaps he could stall and buy Barnaby more time. After a moment, he pasted a smile onto his face. "Lady Flamen, I can't help but wonder why Zen is so important. Who is he that Eastern Emperor Tai would issue an edict and send you in person to enforce it?" Flamen smiled back. "Zen met my daughter earlier in the Phoenix Palace. I think the two of them are a good match. So as soon as I received the news from Master Hai, I decided to see how I could help Zen. It's not so strange, is it, to want to assist someone who may very well be my son-in-law in the future?" Flamen's reasoning left Athamar, Gorin, Winchell, and Master Hai dumbfounded. They raised their eyebrows at each other, lost for words. At Flamen's words, Dorothy's lips quivered, and she blinked quickly. Her grandmother Yasemin observed her expression and frowned. She could feel how unhappy Dorothy was. In her long rule over Origin Mountain, Yasemin had become more and more unsociable, but there was one person whom she still treated with kindness, her granddaughter, for whom she felt a great love. The people of Origin Mountain tended to walk on eggshells around Yasemin, for they were all afraid of her. Winchell, for instance, hadn't dared to inform her himself about Zen's abduction. He had told Dorothy instead, and he had been as surprised as anyone when Yasemin deigned to go to Vastness Mountain. It showed just how much she cared about Dorothy. In the days after Dorothy first met Zen in the Sea of Truth, she had often brought him up in conversations with Yasemin. She told her grandmother all about Zen and her experience with him. Meanwhile, Zen had gone on to save Winchell's son, and then he had made it to the other shore. His successful exploits delighted Dorothy and she loved talking with her grandmother about him. But when Yasemin asked Dorothy directly whether she had a crush on Zen, Dorothy would either blush and stammer and evade the topic, or get bothered and deny it outright. Still, Yasemin was wise and experienced, and she couldn't help but know how Dorothy felt about Zen. Dorothy's stories had captured her attention and made her interested in getting to know Zen, but Zen hadn't gone to Origin Mountain. Instead, he'd joined in the Flow Sword sect. Now, seeing her granddaughter's unhappiness at Flamen's declaration, Yasemin was upset. She shot Flamen a dark look and said, "It's not advisable to marry someone with non-human blood. We can't deny that the purity of one's blood is important. My Dora's blood is the purest." Chapter 2808, Argue. The Oneness Sky Palace was a place where human forces from all over the world gathered. Each mountain had its own bloodline. But Elvinia's bloodline was different. Her blood mostly belonged to the Sun Crow race. It was taboo to talk about Elvinia's bloodline in the Phoenix Palace. Even Flamen took great care not to mention any of it in her daily life. Flamen had become furious when Yasemin had mocked Elvinia's bloodline to her face. And when Yasemin had mentioned Dorothy, Flamen searched Dorothy's face, trying to understand something from it. The Sun Crow race are blessed by the sun and are favored by fate. Elvinia's talent is the best among all the women. She has a bright future. How could she be compared to a bumpkin? Elvinia and Dorothy were both beautiful in their own way. One was noble and lofty while the other was passionate. But it was obvious that Elvenia was superior to Dorothy in terms of talent. Yasmin knocked her cane on the ground, causing the mighty sword hall to tremble. It's just instant enlightenment, but my Dora is. Yasmin broke off. A huge secret was sealed within Dorothy's soul that was limiting her talent. The seal would be removed only when her soul crossed the lust world, stepped into the desire world, and then reached the chaotic source realm. But she could not reveal this secret now. But what? Flamen smiled smugly and said, the instant enlightenment is not easy to achieve. There are only 14 warriors who have become capable of the instant enlightenment in the Oneness Sky Palace over the years. Moreover, Elvenia can not only achieve instant enlightenment on the truth of eternal sword intent, she might also achieve instant enlightenment on the truth of cultivation nature. It's just that she is too young right now, which is why I don't allow her to practice it. There was probably no other talent who could achieve instant enlightenment on two truths of godly ways in the Oneness Sky Palace. It really was an amazing ability. So what? Does marriage depend on talent? Because then the couple can fight all day long. Yethan's eyes widened in confusion as he watched Flamen and Yasmin bickering with each other. He had no idea what they were quarreling about. He had asked the question to buy more time. He hadn't expected it to start a fight between them. The two leaders of the intelligence agency looked on, astonished. It was strange to them that they were fighting for trifles when the two parties were at daggers drawn. Who was this Zen? Why were both the Origin Mountain and the Oneness Mountain so hell-bent on wanting him to marry their precious girls? Athamar, Winchell, and the others looked on, speechless. Athamar knew a little about Zen and Dorothy's relationship. The Origin Mountain had fought for Zen because Dorothy had met Zen before Athamar had. But Athamar had outright dismissed it. After all, Zen had already joined his Swordlight Palace. But what about Elvenia? On the day of the Seven Mountains meeting, Zen had defeated Elvenia. Her defeat had pissed her off and she had left in a huff. Why would Flamen favor him? Athamar cleared his throat and said, I think we should look for Zen first. Dorothy, who was standing next to her grandmother, couldn't bear for the argument to drag anymore. She was a shy girl and to see her grandmother argue with someone over her marriage depressed her to no end. She shook Yasmin's arm and said, Grandma, stop it. We don't even know if Zen is still safe. It was then that Flamen remembered what she had come here for. She turned to Yethan and said, Yethan, please hand Zen over to us. Yethan had had more time to think as they argued. He was now calmer as he said, I really don't know about Zen being brought into the Vastness Mountain. If you still have doubts, you can search the mountain by yourselves. Yethan was still playing the fool, something that gladdened Athamar. He sneered as he said, it's not that difficult to find Zen. Athamar, in order to protect Zen, had cast a latent theurgy on Zen when he had given him the flow swordsmanship. This latent theurgy was called the Nirvana Strike. Zen could use this strike to save himself in desperate situations. Athamar could feel the latent theurgy he had cast on Zen as long as they were close to each other, which was why he had proposed to search the mountain in the beginning. With his ability, it wouldn't have taken him long to find Zen. But things had gotten rough when Yethan stopped him. Athamar flew into the sky. He transformed into a light and hovered around the Vastness Mountain. He circled the mountain, beginning from the top and towards the bottom. Athamar's eyes lit up. He had sensed the latent theurgy on the other side of the Vastness Mountain. There he is. Once he had locked on the position, he began to make his way to Zen. Chapter 2809, Lose. In the Dark Palace, Zen was caught in illusions. He had shattered Barnaby's first attack with his authentic visual world, so for his second offensive, Barnaby had used 60% of his strength. Before Zen could even activate the demonic eye, he had been completely trapped within the illusions again. He could no longer tell the difference between what was real and what wasn't. Such was Barnaby's strength. Being under Barnaby's control, Zen suddenly felt a sharp pain in his soul. It made him tremble and get rid of the illusions. There is another soul in his mind. Barnaby exclaimed in shock. The one causing the pain was No. 9527. Number 9527 was left with no choice on seeing Zen trapped in the illusions. It had to give his soul a ferocious blow, even at the risk of exposing itself. The attack, though not very powerful, was effective. It had at least brought Zen back to his senses. What happened? Natasha asked impatiently. She couldn't fathom why a young man of the lust world would cause Barnaby so much trouble. Barnaby's face darkened. He had tried to deal with Zen but his methods didn't work. He felt terribly ashamed by his failure. He realized he couldn't afford to underestimate Zen in any way. He was in no mood to analyze the soul hiding within Zen's body, as he abruptly shook his white robe. A big black and white eye emerged on the top of his head, like a human's. This was his other sure token, the illusory eye. Lady Natasha, take a few steps back please, Barnaby said politely. Natasha and the others in black stepped back without hesitation, filled with fear of his illusory eye. Barnaby had set his mind on using 100% of his strength this time. He was sure if he didn't hold back, there'd be no possible way Zen could escape the illusions. Good luck, number 9527 said helplessly. It had done all it could. Zen's heart sank in defeat as he looked at the illusory eye. He knew this time, he was doomed. The illusory eye blinked and a swirl of patterns took shape in it. Zen followed and blinked his eyes involuntarily. When the illusory eye blinked again, he blinked again too. What's going on? This time, Zen could do nothing to resist. His eyes glazed over and turned dull as they were lost to him. Barnaby couldn't bear having failed twice already. If he had failed once more, he felt he would have smashed his head through a wall. Now follow me to explore the secrets of the extreme joy, Barnaby recited. Zen, like a puppet, repeated back, I will follow you to explore the secrets of the extreme joy. Obey my orders, Barnaby continued. I will obey your orders, Zen replied zombified. Give me the subsequent chapter of the truth of eternal sword intent, Barnaby ordered, shooting a devious smile at Natasha. Her face lit up. With a wave of her hand, the brush and ink floated towards Zen. He took the brush and began scribbling on the white paper. Word by word, the truth enlightenment appeared. Finally we've got it. Natasha shrieked excitedly. Finally, after so much trouble and effort, they had the truth enlightenment. 20 words, 50 words, 80 words. The paper was filled with more and more words. Just as Zen finished writing more than 100 words, Barnaby and Natasha sensed something. Suddenly, their faces changed and they were no longer so excited and confident. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The brush, ink and paper flew back towards Natasha at once. Get Zen out of here, she bellowed. Barnaby began waving his arms and was about to lead Zen to an escape when a loud explosion rang out from the ceiling of the palace. Bang! The ceiling cracked. Bang! A huge hole opened as the ceiling was destroyed by the second explosion. Athamar then descended through the hole. Barnaby still tried to lead Zen away. Athamar noticed his shuffling and a stern expression took over his face as he gestured forward towards them. A touch of sword radiance turned into thousands of waves and rushed at Barnaby to stop him in his tracks. Seeing this, Natasha gently stretched her body. The space in the palace began to twist. The waves of the sword radiance released by Athamar were cut into several pieces, swishing about madly. Even your Emperor Gethin has given up, but you still choose to struggle. Do you really want to die? Athamar was truly infuriated. He stamped his foot down hard, and a circle of sword marks appeared around him. In a flash, countless mysterious textures spread throughout the palace. The bodies of the men in black robes, Natasha, and even Barnaby and Zen were engulfed in the strange textures. Splash! The palace was quite sturdy. Athamar had struck it twice in order to enter earlier. Now, the palace collapsed in an instant, turning to a mess of tiny shards. The shards were the same as the textures that Athamar had set, their edges as sharp and smooth as knives. Chapter 2810, An Explanation. Nearly all of the palace had disintegrated. Only Zen, Barnaby, Natasha, and the men in black remained intact. From the looks of it, Athamar only needed to activate a simple command to dissolve them into pieces as well. Everyone stood frozen, careful not to make even the smallest movement. Barnaby wasn't incredibly inferior to Athamar, but his special ability, the illusory eye, was almost useless during a face-to-face battle. If he really fought with Athamar head-on, he'd probably lose to him. Natasha was definitely powerful, but not as powerful as Athamar. The men in black were the backbone of the intelligence agency. They were warriors at the chaotic source realm and they were unable to challenge Athamar. Since Athamar had told them that Gethin had already given up, none of them could resist. They would easily die if they did. Buzz! Barnaby withdrew his illusory eye. The illusion went away and Zen reverted back to normal. He finally saw Athamar, who was standing not far away. Master Athamar, he greeted enthusiastically. Are you all right? Athamar asked with concern. Zen shook his head and smiled. I'll be all right, he assured. This is my fault. I did not expect that they'd have the audacity to take you away. Athamar shifted his glance towards Natasha and Barnaby and added, Don't let me see Holden again if you don't want him to suffer. Athamar couldn't deal with Gethin, but he had his confidence in beating Holden. Let's go, Athamar said to Zen. Where are we going, Master Athamar? Zen inquired. To the mighty sword hall. We can't let them think that they can get away easily, Athamar replied coldly. Then, he grabbed Zen as they flew up swiftly. Barnaby straightened his robe, ensuring that it was crisp and perfect. He realized just how strong Athamar had become and how little progress he had been through in comparison in the past few years. Suddenly, sadness washed over him. I'll go to the mighty sword hall, too, announced Natasha. Gethin would have never allowed Athamar to come. Someone must have forced him to do it. Athamar took Zen to have Gethin explain. What they did not know was that Natasha would soon be standing beside Gethin ready to defend her husband. When Zen was brought into the mighty sword hall, Athamar sneered. Emperor Gethin, you said with absolute certainty that Zen wasn't here. Then who is this guy? Athamar tried his best to sound as polite as he could be. Gethin had no defense. He merely shrugged his shoulders and acted innocent. I really was kept in the dark about this. He turned to the others behind him. Why is he here? Would you know? Yasemin responded from her golden throne, quit playing dumb. You can't save yourself by lying. Flamen added, Emperor Gethin, please explain yourself. Gethin's face felt hot. As a man occupying a high position, he wasn't used to being confronted. He knew they wouldn't let the matter go so easily. Neither Yasemin, Flamen, nor Athamar would let go of this matter just because Zen had returned unharmed. They needed an explanation from Gethin. Despite the pressures, Gethin maintained his calm. He kept silent and fixed his eyes on the exit of the hall. Natasha came rushing in. She went straight towards Gethin and knelt down in front of him. What's going on, Natasha? Gethin asked, pretending that he knew nothing. This is all my fault, Natasha cried. I shouldn't have kidnapped Zen and taken him to the Vastness Mountain. I only did it to avenge Marco's death. I'm so sorry to have caused you trouble. Tears poured down her face. Marco's death? What happened to Marco? Gethin asked in shock. Natasha wiped her tears as she got up on her feet. He killed him. She pointed at Zen and went on to tell his husband how their son had died a tragic death. Chapter 2811, The Chaotic Source World. Yasemin and Flamen were poker-faced. Everyone present knew that Natasha and Gethin were putting on a show. Only those who didn't know the truth might be deceived by their act. And whatever the reason, Zen had killed Marco. But Marco's death wasn't a loss to Gethin. Dorothy couldn't stand it any longer. She interrupted Natasha and said, Marco brought trouble upon himself. He deserved it. Some time ago on the other shore, Zen didn't want any enmity with him, but Marco attacked Zen with the intention of killing him. This time, Zen must have had no choice but to fight back and kill him. Zen knew what Natasha was driving at. If he didn't fight back, others would think he was in the wrong. Marco followed me all the way to the Clear Lake to try and kill me. He even lured me into the battle ring. Lady Natasha, it was fine you didn't stop your son from killing others, but no one was allowed to fight back. How is it reasonable? Zen asked. Natasha's eyes flashed. She was trying to cover up the Vastness Mountain's guilt, and Zen's cutting reply was exactly what she wanted. No matter what Marco did, he was my son. Isn't it reasonable for me to take revenge for his death? I had no other choice but to bring you here. I wasn't expecting so many people to blame me. Zen cursed inwardly, you don't care about your son's life. All you want is the truth enlightenment. Natasha's words did make sense. As a mother, she was furious, but all she could do was bringing Zen to the Vastness Mountain. And she was justified in doing so. Athamar, Flamen, and Yasemin were finding it difficult to find reasons for making a fuss about it. Tit for tat. Marco wanted to kill Zen, but Zen killed him instead. It is justified that Lady Natasha created problems for Zen as a way of revenge. But since Zen is fine at the moment, I think it would be better for us to let it go for now, Flamen said, in an attempt to make the final judgment. Everyone present was intelligent, and she knew that she couldn't get a satisfactory answer for Zen. If Natasha continued to act the way she had so far, she would gain the upper hand. That was why Flamen thought it better to put an end to this thing right away. Clasping his hands behind his back, Gethin sighed, I didn't teach my son well, or else he wouldn't have been in trouble. I'm sorry for the trouble caused to you, Lady Flamen, Madam Yasemin. Yasemin waved a hand at the golden throne. Dorothy helped her up and they both walked up to Zen. Dorothy had told her all about Zen even when he was still in the Divine Land, but this was the first time that Yasemin had seen him. She looked Zen up and down with her old eyes, and her crumpled face relaxed as she said, the first time I heard of you, you had just entered the Sea of Truth. Your cultivation base has increased at a very high speed. Am I right in saying that you will soon have the indigo soul? Zen folded his hands in respect and bowed to Yasemin. Yes, but it will take some more time, he said. One's soul of light gradually turned from brown to indigo purple as they continued to cultivate. Humans usually called it the indigo soul. After the Seven Mountains meeting, Zen had once again gone to the temple and obtained some soul crystal. His soul of light was now emitting a faint purple light. Of late, Zen hadn't been to the other shore much, and because of this, he hadn't made it to the next stage. Nobody knew his limits, but it would be a while before his soul of light became an indigo soul. I have prepared soul crystal for Dora to help her step into the desire world. Looks like I need to prepare some for you as well, Yasamine said. Zen was confused. The soul crystal Yasamine had prepared would be more than enough to help Dorothy enter the desire world. It must be a very big one, and he thought it was inappropriate for him to accept such a gift. Zen bowed to Yasamine once again and said, "It's very kind of you, Madam Yasamine, but I am in no hurry to practice." The old lady shook her head and said with a smile, "The chaotic source world is about to reopen. You can't miss such a good opportunity. I have 2 tickets, one for you, and the other for Dora. Only this way can I rest assured. Please don't refuse this." Dorothy said, "Zen, it will take 10 years for the chaotic source world to open again. It doesn't matter if you miss out on it now, but you will have to wait for 10 more years for the next one. Don't refuse my grandma's kindness." Zen knew that one had to break through to the chaotic source realm after entering the desire world. That was a type of complete reinforcement for the corporeal body. Only after this reinforcement could one bear more other shore power. But he didn't know how to do it. Dorothy was right. The chaotic source world opened once in 10 years and he couldn't miss such an opportunity. Flamen made her way to Zen's side and smiled as she said, "What a coincidence. My daughter Elvinia is also planning to go to the chaotic source world. I have a lot of tickets. I can give you as many as you want. Besides, you don't need to take care of Elvinia. She will be of help to you instead." What was going on? Flamen was prepared to give Zen as many tickets as he wanted. Everyone was flabbergasted at this development. The tickets that Flamen and Yasamine were talking about weren't extraordinary. The chaotic source world complemented the grand world cultivation method. Long ago, when the creatures of the source world had entered the other shore, they had, with time, gradually discovered many powerful other shore tokens. They had thus greatly increased their power of control. But their strength reached a limit, which was about 1,000 divine megatons, and caused their physical bodies to be limited as well. Only a small number of powerful non-human creatures could exceed this limit, while creatures of most races came to a halt. No creature since the Middle Ages had been able to break through this limit. Some masters had stepped into higher stages of the other shore. The power of their other shore tokens could reach thousands or even tens of thousands of divine megatons. But they could only use up to 1,000 divine megatons of other shore power when they fought. That was why the other shore tokens of descending type were their best options. They didn't need the warriors' bodies to bear their power, and so, the other shore power that the warriors released would be far beyond the limit of their bodies. However, the other shore tokens of the strengthening type, auxiliary type, and mysterious type were excellent. It was a great waste to just put them aside. The snake goddess had later discovered a special method on the other shore that could greatly increase the strength of the body. Chapter 2812, The Origin of Chaotic Source Reinforcement. The method the snake goddess had discovered to exceedingly increase one's physical strength was called the chaotic source reinforcement. When the body refining in the wild god system no longer worked to enable warriors to cross the sea of truth and reach the other shore, it slowly declined in the source world. However, some barbarian races still preferred that technique. But it could only give them limited power, which in most cases, was incomparable to the other shore power. Both the snake goddess, and the other super forces in the source world faced difficulties in tackling this issue. They had spent a long time trying and finding a way to strengthen their bodies. At that time, the snake goddess had successfully reached stage 22. Over there, she came across an unusual other shore token, and it was called the chaotic source spirit. It was an auxiliary type of other shore token. Its mechanisms were simple. When one activated it, it would become one with the cultivator's body and merge with it. By doing so, it would assist them and increase their physical strength by a fair amount. The chaotic source spirit was no extraordinary other shore token. In fact, it was quite common to be found on stage 22. The other shore power contained in it was about average, and it didn't give the warriors who used it much of a power boost. Therefore, it wasn't an invaluable find. However, the snake goddess had stumbled upon a distinctive property of the chaotic source spirit and tapped into its hidden power. It turned out that the chaotic source spirit was actually a living being. Coming across living creatures on the other shore was rather rare. However, it was nothing impressive for someone like the snake goddess, who had already reached a high level of cultivation. Even so, the chaotic source spirit had some distinctive properties to its name that set it apart from other living beings. Although it was an auxiliary type of other shore token, it also shared the qualities with descending type of other shore tokens. Having learned such a thing, the snake goddess planned on testing her new theory out. Without wasting a second, she asked Fuxi to catch one chaotic source spirit on the other shore and then summon it at the same time when she did. Once they were activated, the two chaotic source spirits familiarized themselves with each other and began communicating in their own language. It was discovered that they were interdependent creatures and were capable of reproducing, which explained how descending type of other shore tokens remained in the source world for that long. Once they began to reproduce, the snake goddess observed an inconceivable phenomenon. The new chaotic source spirits made from their breeding did not return to the other shore but remained in the source world. What was more interesting was the fact that they were born ownerless. Both the snake goddess and Fuxi stood dumbfounded at this sight. They couldn't figure out the mystery behind the chaotic source spirits. Just what were they? Were they beings of the source world? Or were they other shore tokens from the other shore? They could have been both or neither of the two. One chaotic source spirit held the capability of strengthening the physical prowess of the warrior who activated it, but what if they used more than one at once? Once she thought of this method, the snake goddess felt excitement fill her existence. Quickly, they used their acquired chaotic source spirits and caused them to reproduce until they multiplied to a significant degree. When their population reached just over 100, the snake goddess made Fuxi absorb all of them to test out her theory. One after the other, each of them merged with Fuxi's body and made his physical prowess rise steadily. They kept being absorbed into his body until his physical power reached a notably high level. Thus, Fuxi was the first one to undergo the chaotic source reinforcement. The news that the Pear Hill was nurturing the chaotic source spirits quickly spread like wildfire. As a result, their value increased, and they became notably popular on the other shore. Every super force out there began their frantic search for chaotic source spirits. As a result, the chaotic source spirits that once lay in high numbers on stage 22 were almost depleted. Following in the footsteps of the snake goddess, the masters of the super forces bred these chaotic source spirits and multiplied their quantity to their desired number. They began viewing these unusual creatures as a gateway to attaining overwhelming power for themselves. The emergence of the chaotic source spirits meant that those strengthening type of other shore tokens and the mysterious type of other shore tokens, which had various incredible abilities, would become more practical. At least after the warriors had enough chaotic source spirits, they could exceed their limits and further build up their physical strength. However, this fortunate find didn't stay relevant for long. Soon they were stuck on this path. When the snake goddess bred the chaotic source spirits, everything went on smoothly. She nurtured about several thousand of the chaotic source spirits within a year. However, when the super forces began to do the same, they found that the reproduction ability of the chaotic source spirits was limited and had considerably declined. Some super forces had worked hard for several years, but only managed to obtain a few hundred chaotic source spirits. And in more unfortunate events, they got nothing, as the chaotic source spirits refused to breed. Confused and frustrated, the super forces scavenged the temples for an explanation and a conclusion to the issue. It soon came to light that the chaotic source spirits had a limitation of a certain number to exist at one time, which was 200,000. Once they capped 200,000, they would discontinue reproducing themselves. The only condition for a new one to be born was if an existing one was refined. Since the snake goddess was the first one to discover this property, she had already gathered 100,000 of them before the super forces could follow after her. This left close to nothing for the rest of the aspirants. In the best cases, they managed to nurture over 10,000 chaotic source spirits. But for some others, they only got a few hundred. How unfortunate. Moreover, after the chaotic source spirits those super forces caught gave birth to new ones, there was a high probability that they would be born in the Pear Hill. After all, Pear Hill had the largest population of them. As this continued, the number of chaotic source spirits of the Pear Hill had reached as many as 150,000, while the other forces had less. This unfair distribution of these chaotic source spirits made many super forces jealous. Soon after, they gathered in one place and stood united to force Pear Hill to hand over the chaotic source spirits. Coming under pressure from the confrontation, the snake goddess gave in and reached a compromise with them. Together, with the super forces, she created the chaotic source world and stored all their chaotic source spirits in there. As per the estimation, every 10 years, the number of chaotic source spirits would reach its limit of 200,000 from reproducing. Only then would the members of different races come to absorb them. And the amount of chaotic source spirits one would be able to absorb to complete the chaotic source reinforcement all depended on luck. However, the chaotic source world was not accessible to everyone. They required tickets to enter, which were always scarce in the source world. One ticket almost meant an opportunity to become a warrior at the chaotic source realm. There were so many talents in the 7 mountains of the Oneness Sky Palace, and all of them had their lustful eyes on the tickets. Now that Flamen offered to give Zen many of these in one go, it seemed like the unthinkable. Feeling frustrated, Yasmin poked her cane into the ground as she hissed at Flamen with enraged eyes. What's the use of having many tickets? Flamen didn't bother to argue with her. She barely gave her a second glance. Instead, she smiled sweetly at Zen and gestured with kind words. Since the Flow Sword sect is very close to our Phoenix Palace and I've given you the token of our palace, you must come to visit us someday. With that, she turned around without looking at anyone else and made her way out. Watching her receding figure, Yasmin spat in her direction dejectedly, then walked away towards the gate of the mighty sword hall. Dorothy switched her gaze between her grandmother and Zen to read their expressions. After a long pause, she spoke to break the silence. Zen, why did you go to the Phoenix Palace? Flamen's attitude differed from that of usual. It made Dorothy suspicious of whether something had happened between Zen and Elvinia. I offended Elvinia at the 7 Mountains meeting last time, Zen said in an indifferent tone. Dorothy crossed her arms and nodded as she recalled the events. Oh, I remember that. I reminded you to be cautious of Elvinia's revenge because she was very angry at that time. Zen shrugged his shoulders and said, she did take her revenge. She kidnapped my families to Phoenix Palace. I had no choice but to go there and have a battle with her. Athamar, Goran, Winchell, and Master Hai were treading along slowly behind Yasmin. They were all famous strong warriors, but they were also interested to know a lot of things. Overhearing what Zen had to say, they couldn't help but wonder to themselves. How did Zen manage to gain such favor from Flamen after just a fight with Elvinia? It seemed too good to be true. If you really battled with Elvinia, why was Flamen so nice to you just now? Dorothy asked innocently while blinking her big beautiful eyes that were filled with curiosity. Chapter 2813, Backer. Zen had not been present in the mighty sword hall during the argument between Yasmin and Flamen. It thus puzzled him to see Yasmin's hostile attitude towards Flamen. He assumed they must have some long-standing grudge against each other. As for the tickets to the chaotic source world, Zen didn't know their value, so he did not see it as a big deal when Flamen offered to give him many tickets. He was more curious as to why Yasmin and Flamen were fighting over him. He wondered what that was all about. What do you mean? He asked Dorothy, hoping to make sense of everything. She smiled at him playfully. She wants you to be her son-in-law. What? Zen asked incredulously. His jaw dropped. He had only met Flamen one time. It had been a memorable encounter, and she had been very friendly towards him, but to marry her daughter. What was this? Are you tempted? Dorothy teased. She could see his reaction and deliberately sought to provoke him further. Zen could see what Dorothy was doing, so he modulated his response. He put on a helpless smile and said, I don't know Elvinia all that well, and we don't really have anything to do with each other. If Lady Flamen said that, perhaps she was just joking. Was he serious? Did he really believe Flamen was just kidding around? Dorothy stared at Zen, her eyes wide with disbelief. She was very young and naturally shy, so although she wanted to press him, she decided to stop asking further questions. She was worried that others would think she was jealous. After they left the mighty sword hall, Athamar took out a massive sword, motioning for everyone to come closer. They all stepped on the sword and it lifted them into the air. They flew quickly away from Vastness Mountain, eager to be done with the whole ordeal. Back in the mighty sword hall, Gethin walked to the golden throne and sat back down. Natasha clapped her hands. Green light curtains covered the entire hall. Gethin's gentle manner had changed completely. His sharp eyes became ferocious, like those of a furious beast. How many words did you get from him? He roared. Natasha and the 2 leaders of the intelligence agency looked tense. Their efforts with Zen had been cut short by the arrival of representatives from Origin Mountain and Oneness Mountain, which was a great shame. It explained why Gethin was so angry. About 100 words, Natasha began. She was cut short by an energy that lashed out at her with a sharp, cracking sound. She let out a croak of pain. An invisible hand reached out and grabbed Natasha by the throat, strangling her. She was dragged before Gethin, who watched coldly as she choked. She wheezed and struggled unsuccessfully to free herself. After all our efforts, the best you could do was 100 words. Today I almost couldn't find a way out. Gethin spat out angrily. Please stop, Emperor Gethin. Emperor Gethin, what happened was not Lady Natasha's fault. The two leaders of the intelligence agency spoke up and pleaded with Gethin to be reasonable. Gethin threw Natasha to the ground, and she landed with a thud, clutching at her aching throat. Gethin's eyes still burned with rage. The worst part is, we openly asked Zen about the subsequent chapter of the Truth of Eternal Sword Intent. No doubt he will report this to Athamar. So what? No one in Vastness Mountain harmed Zen or did anything wrong. They can't accuse us of anything. What can they do to us? Natasha said, slowly sitting up on the ground. She shot a look of grievance at Gethin. Gethin glowered back at her. You underestimate them. They will suspect us and eventually put together the pieces and figure out what we are doing. Emperor Gethin, you are worrying too much. Given the current situation of the Oneness Sky Palace, it doesn't matter if they notice something. In 2 to 3 years, we can finally rest easy. We have strong allies on our side, said one of the leaders of the intelligence agency. Gethin shook his head and exhaled deeply. The fierce light in his eyes grew intense as he said, I certainly hope so. As they flew, perched on Athamar's huge sword, Zen told the others what had happened to him on Vastness Mountain. The faces of Athamar and Goran darkened. They clearly place a great significance on the truth enlightenment, which is strange, said Master Hai. After Zen deciphers the complete truth enlightenment, it will be circulated throughout the entire Oneness Sky Palace sooner or later. Why are they in such a hurry? Do they worry that we won't give it to the Vastness Mountain? Goran mused. I thought it was strange too, Zen admitted. It was impossible that the people of Vastness Mountain had asked about the truth enlightenment without any deeper motive. There was clearly more at stake, something that they just couldn't see yet. Unless, maybe they can't wait, Athamar said thoughtfully. Why not? The Vastness Mountain has existed for a long time. They're not moving away, are they? Winchell asked. As soon as he spoke, the expressions of the others changed. Yasmin's eyes narrowed, and she snorted. Coldly she said, it seems that they have decided to walk on a different path. She and the others realized that Vastness Mountain must be planning to break away eventually from the Oneness Sky Palace. Why would they be so eager to get the truth enlightenment ahead of the others, unless they were going to leave the Oneness Sky Palace before the truth enlightenment was disseminated to everyone? Of course, this was all speculation. They had no evidence except Zen's experience to support their assumption. But at least for now, they had a theory that explained the mysterious actions of the people of Vastness Mountain, and they would act accordingly. I will report this to Eastern Emperor Tai, Master Hai said. Athamar touched the huge sword and it sped up. They accelerated until they were flying at a blurring speed, and soon they arrived at Oneness Mountain. As soon as they landed, Zen started to leave, but Yasmin held out a hand to stop him. She told him that she meant it about preparing the soul crystal for him, and that he needed to get ready to go to the other shore to receive it. Yasmin was the second most important figure in the Oneness Sky Palace. To refuse her would be an act of utmost disrespect. So Zen nodded obediently. At any rate, if the chaotic source world was really going to open, then Zen definitely had no intention of missing this opportunity. Meanwhile, in the Sky Horizon province, the black ship quietly sailed across the sky. Shira sat on one side of the ship, her slender legs dangling in the air. A gentle rolling mountain came into view. The mountain was dotted with buildings of various shapes and sizes. The tallest building was a whopping 10,000 feet high, while the smallest was only as high as a palm. The variation was too great. Obviously the mountain was home to different races of beings. Most of the races in the source world had carved out their own exclusive territory. It was rare to see different races living together on the same land. We've already arrived at Black Mountain Guild. Shira murmured to herself. She put one hand on the rail while she dragged something with the other hand. There was a whoosh, and a man was pulled out of the black ship. He slammed onto the deck with a muffled thud. The evil god stood up from the deck, his face full of displeasure. I was cultivating. You interrupted me when you dragged me here. Shira was not bothered by his irritation. There is a more suitable place for you to cultivate, she said, pointing downwards. The evil god looked down. There was a strange, eerie aura emanating from the mountain below them. He could sense that this was not a good place. Below us is the Black Mountain Guild, which is comprised of over 800 races. The competition among the people of that sect is very fierce. It's almost impossible for someone to succeed without a backer. You must be constantly on your guard, even among people of your own race. Not every human can be trusted, Shira said in a clinical, analytic tone, as she gazed down at the mountain. Backer. The evil god looked disdainful. I don't need anyone to back me up. I'm my own backer. By now, Shira was used to the arrogant manner of the evil god. This man's talent had surprised her again and again. Still, he had just reached the other shore realm, so she thought his arrogance in this instance was unfounded and a bit annoying. She curled her lips at him. Fine, you may go down there now. A bang sounded. The evil god suddenly fell, as though a heavy and irresistible weight had been strapped to his body. He dropped from the sky like a stone. Chapter 2814, Black Mountain Guild. As the pressure of gravity that was exerted on the evil god increased, he was rendered powerless and couldn't escape the situation he was in. If he continued free-falling at such a rapid pace, it wouldn't be long before he smashed into the ground forcefully. Even he wouldn't be able to bear the repercussions. When the distance between him and the ground decreased to less than 200 feet, he shut his eyes bracing for impact. A trace of ruthlessness was smeared across his face. Suddenly, a wild stream of energy rushed out. Bang! It was like something as big and bright as the sun had exploded and sent ripples surging across the ground. A massive crater thumped to the surface with the evil god lying inside. That woman, he cursed under his breath, his voice barely audible from the pressure of the air. After that, his head smashed against a weighty object as he finally collapsed on the ground. It almost made him faint, but he resisted the concussion. Attempting to get a hold of his senses, he shook his head several times and held it firmly. After he blinked several times, he noticed a black token lying near his feet. He picked it up carefully and flicked it to study it from all sides. It had a strange pattern carved into it. Other than that, there was nothing else worth looking at. As the evil god got back up on his feet, he put away the token safely. Looking around his surroundings, he cursed Shira again, blaming her for his ordeal before climbing out of his self-made pit. The moment he climbed out, his ears alerted him to rustling sounds coming from a distance. As he looked in the direction of the noise, two wolves that were the size of humans lurking nearby enveloped his view. When their eyes fell on the evil god, they gleamed under the dark as they spotted their prey. You want to eat me now, huh? A cold smile stretched across the face of the evil god as he fearlessly continued walking in the direction of the Black Mountain Guild. Just as he turned around casually, the two wolves took advantage of the moment and pounced on him aggressively. Suddenly, two balls of light filled with massive energy erupted from behind the evil god's back. The wolves whimpered in pain as they got crushed by the way's blending energy. It seems beasts will always be beasts. The evil god glanced back at the broken limbs splayed on the ground of the two black wolves and shook his head. When he turned his head back to look ahead, he frowned. He rolled his eyes as he examined the sunken ravine straight ahead. Strange creatures of all shapes and sizes made themselves known as they appeared before him from it. Some as big as a leopard, some as small as mice, but each of them was powerful. Other creatures of unfamiliar forms were among them too. So, Shira has thrown me into the lair of beasts. Pleased by how it all turned out for him, the evil god laughed violently. He could feel the killing intent buried deep within him reignite as he glared back at the creatures. At this moment, the beast in the lead walked up and spoke in an authoritative voice. Human, hand over the Black Mountain token in your hand. The creature stretched out its palm as if to gesture the evil god to give it up. The Black Mountain token is not something for you to take. If you give it to us, we will go easy on you and grant you a painless death. Another beast came forward and erupted in frustration. Some of them stood behind in the ranks, and hissed at the evil god who stood arrogantly. All of a sudden, all sorts of noises began to surround him as the creatures howled declaring war. It so happened, the reason the two wolves attacked him in the first place was to retrieve the Black Mountain token from him. Black Mountain Guild was very important to these creatures. It was well known around these parts. It was willing to admit beasts from any race. Such a place was perfect for the non-human creatures who roamed the lands alone and hadn't been born in a strong group. Since it was a highly regarded place, getting access to it wasn't easy. It was close to impossible for these creatures to obtain the Black Mountain token. In fact, some beasts that resided near Black Mountain Guild fought and ate each other, simply to get a Black Mountain token. Sensing overwhelming aggression soaring from the creatures, the evil god slowly began to let his arrogance fade. Although Shira didn't tell him anything about the Black Mountain token, it was still evident the token could get him into the Black Mountain Guild. Each of these creatures stood in their ranks stationing themselves, ready to attack. But then, diamond-shaped light rings appeared under the evil god's feet. Due to receiving some guidance recently, he had managed to reach a new level of Way's blending energy. As he stood there gathering all his energy, the creatures all dashed towards him to not give him the window to counterattack. Tear him apart. That Black Mountain token belongs to me. The beasts roared violently with bloodshot eyes. They gathered motivation from one another's words and charged towards the evil god. Right then, a piercing noise exploded and filled the air with its dominance. As the creatures gathered around the evil god like moths to a flame, the rings of light exploded layer by layer in the air. An incandescent shock wave spread out far and wide like a fountain overflowing with energy. With the help of the impact force, the evil god boosted himself forward like an arrow shot from a bow. Some of the beasts perished under the influence of the wave's blending energy, while the rest chased after him. They were unfazed by their fallen companions. These creatures inhabited near the Black Mountain Guild had grown up witnessing massacre and slaughter. Death wasn't something that could scare them, it was a common occurrence to them. Even though the evil god's spectacle of strength was frightening, he failed to intimidate them. Squeak, squeak, squeak. An extremely agile gray mouse leapt up towards the back of the evil god amidst the commotion. Before it could cause much damage, he crushed it using his aura. However, the mouse had already succeeded in ripping off a piece of his flesh from his shoulder. Just then, a gigantic beast the size of an elephant used a long whip covered in thorns to slash at the back of the evil god. It caused his clothes to tear apart as blood gushed out from his flesh. He almost staggered after getting attacked as he groaned in pain. If I let these monsters surround me, I'm afraid I'll lose my limbs. Dang that Shira, he cursed at her again in his heart to not voice his fears out to the beasts that chased after him. His journey in the black ship had caused him to expand his knowledge about a lot of things and broadened his perspective. Although Shira was an arrogant woman, she still helped the evil god rebuild his points of view on many things. She had told him that Wei's blending energy was pointless and even warned him that some people had failed to try to succeed in this respect. Instead, she gave him the suggestion of an alternative method he could use. Ignoring her advice at first, he stood firm on the fact that these energies would be mixed with each other sooner or later. But eventually, he gave up and decided to listen to her. After all, she was the woman who promised him freedom from the rebirth land that restrained him. In exchange for that, he was tasked to reach the chaotic source realm. However, to enter the chaotic source realm, one had to go to the chaotic source world. The time when the doors of the chaotic source world would open was already drawing near. Time was running out of his hands like grains of sand. He had to increase his cultivation quickly before that happened. This was the reason why Shira had thrown him down from the black ship, to send him off into the Black Mountain Guild for cultivation. This guild housed many different races within it, and at times it was very chaotic. Killing and conspiring against each other was a common practice in there. It only produced the most ruthless warriors. It wasn't just a place for cultivation, but to test your survival instincts as well. The evil god continued to rush his way away from the creatures for tens of miles without stopping and entered a ravine. Just as he walked inside, the beasts stopped chasing after him and stopped. What should we do now? He has reached the gate of the Black Mountain Guild. We have no Black Mountain token. Anyone who dares to step in there without a Black Mountain token will surely die. Let's just go. That human brat got lucky. But I know he won't be able to survive half a day inside the Black Mountain Guild. As those creatures slowly dispersed and disappeared into the dark, the evil god watched as his face declared a hint of viciousness. He had always been the one who would try to kill others, how could he swallow the insult of being the one hunted instead? At that point, he decided and wrote it on his flesh, once he made some achievements in the Black Mountain Guild, he would come back and annihilate all of them. When he thought of this, he felt a faint trace of cold air tickle his neck. Just then, he sensed an unsettling presence approach him from behind. A miserable voice echoed in his ears and caused him to turn around. Human, do you have a Black Mountain token? He glanced in the direction of the sound and saw pieces of ragged cloth drifting in the air, beneath which was a skeleton. It was unknown to what creature it had belonged before, and on the back of the skeleton was a pair of folded wing bones. Witnessing a live structure of bones, the pupils in his eyes shrank as he handed over the token obediently. All warriors of our Black Mountain Guild who have survived to get out of here are formidable. But I hope you can live to see that day. Ha ha ha, follow me. The skeleton let out a horrific laugh and turned around while gesturing him to follow after. The evil god walked behind it with determined eyes, letting the darkness devour his existence. Chapter 2815, Milo's Way of Returning the Favor. The second Zen showed up in his house in the Flow Sword sect, Margaret rushed to him, eager to ask him some questions. When Zen had gone to the Clear Lake, he had taken his leave without saying goodbye. The fact Trish had returned alone, without Zen, had left Margaret and the other women very worried about him. Now, seeing their beloved Zen back home safe and sound, they felt so relieved. The women demanded an explanation. Zen shrugged apologetically. He decided to tell them about his adventures at the Clear Lake, but he completely omitted his journey to the Phoenix Palace and Vastness Mountain. Trish eyed him carefully. She knew that Zen was keeping something from them, but she kept quiet. As a servant, she couldn't meddle with how her master chose to deal with these things. Barely a day had passed when someone knocked at the door of their house. When Trish opened the door, she was surprised to be greeted by a very excited Milo. "I heard that your master Zen is back," Milo asked eagerly. He was becoming more and more polite with Zen. In the beginning, he didn't even have interest in knowing Zen's name. "My master just came back," she answered hesitantly. Trish wondered how Milo knew so soon. Could he have hired someone to keep an eye on their courtyard house? It turned out her suspicions were correct. After Milo had gotten a part of the truth enlightenment, he started to study it at once and found a huge secret. Unable to contain his excitement, he had rushed to Zen's dwelling to share the news, only to find out Zen wasn't there. He had no choice but to wait for him to come back. Thus, he resorted to hiring someone to watch Zen's house. He needed to be notified the moment Zen returned. "I have something to tell him," explained Milo, his eyes twinkling excitedly. Trish couldn't see how she could refuse. With a meek nod, she went off to fetch her master. Zen saw how Milo was practically giddy with excitement. His curiosity was piqued. Is he here for more words of truth enlightenment? He wondered. "It's been a long time since you joined in the Flow Sword sect, Zen," Milo said with a curt bow. "I wonder what level of cultivation you're on with the Truth Swordsmanship Manual." Zen raised his eyebrow in surprise. It had indeed been a while since he joined in the Flow Sword sect, but he had obtained the Flow Swordsmanship only recently. Additionally, since he had been busy with the Seven Mountains meeting some time ago, he hadn't really taken the time to study it till he got to the Clear Lake. Even then, he hadn't been able to study it that much. "I haven't grasped much of it," Zen answered honestly. "Why do you ask?" It seemed Milo grew even more excited when he heard Zen's answer. "Then hurry and cultivate it. The first 150 words of your truth enlightenment are truly a perfect match for the flow strike, especially the first move of heart-slaughtering Thurgy. When paired with the Soul of Light, it is extremely profound and powerful." As spoke, Milo's eyes darted all over the courtyard, as though he were looking for something. Lacking a more suitable target, his eyes fell on Zen. "What are you doing?" Zen asked vigilantly. He noticed the crazed look in Milo's eyes. Suddenly, Milo activated the Truth of Eternal Sword Intent. With a slight wave of his hand, he began to emanate a powerful aura. With a flash of light, Milo transformed into a giant sword and swung at Zen. "Heart-slaughtering strike," Zen cried in alert. He could sense how strong the killing intent was. He darted backward warily. Whoosh! Zen dodged the blade just in time. Channeling his power to his feet to act quickly, he prepared to strike back as his footprints left cracks in the pavement. The women, who were on the other side of the house at the time, were all shocked by Milo's sudden attack. Seeing Zen successfully avoid his attacks, Milo came back to his senses. Transforming back to his human self, he glanced about the courtyard apologetically. "Ah, I'm sorry, I just wanted to give it a try. I didn't mean to get so carried away." Hearing the sincerity in his words, Zen shook his head in annoyance. Yet, somehow, he was also amused. This fellow is truly obsessed with his sword. "Your momentum, is that created by cultivating truth enlightenment?" Zen asked curiously. Actually, Zen already realized that even when he had just started to cultivate truth enlightenment. He just wanted to confirm this with Milo. After all, the mind sword of truth enlightenment, which transformed his thoughts into a sword, was similar to heart-slaughtering strike. Zen had been too busy to study these days. Milo, on the other hand, kept practicing. Because of this, he had figured out the connection between the truth enlightenment and the flow strike sooner. Yes, Milo's expression shifted from apologetic to elated in a split second. "Impressive, right? Soul-level methods are indeed very powerful," Zen said slowly. "Of course," Milo laughed. "I've been killing many people in other shore the past few days. The people from the Bering race are all scared of me. Ha ha ha." Within the first 4 stages of Other Shore, the 3 sacred temples of the human race were built together. Most of the warriors within the first 4 stages were young. They tended to challenge each other, often resulting in soul-level confrontation. In earlier times when the 4 temples had just been built, everyone had gotten along fine. However, with the decay of the temple of the 9 Li race, the temples of the Bering race and Divine Farmer race gradually rose to power. The Oneness Sky Palace's temple, on the other hand, grew to be at a disadvantage. The disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace were often bullied. With the help of truth enlightenment, Milo had made great progress in cultivation. This earned some respect for himself in the Oneness Sky Palace. So that's how it is. Zen nodded slightly in approval. It was true that the battles within the other shore were all soul level. The warriors with a stronger soul would win. If the flow strike could work together with the truth enlightenment, it would indeed be a great help to them. Milo smiled at Zen gratefully. He usually didn't like asking others for help, but he was thankful that Zen had shared 150 words of the truth enlightenment with him. He was determined to repay Zen's kindness. This was why he shared this exciting news with Zen. While Zen knew he could have discovered this too on his own through cultivation, Milo's input could speed up the process. Zen had already read through the flow swordsmanship, but there were some points he didn't understand. Now, with Milo's guidance, he was able to comprehend it all. His hands twitched, as he was itching to verify Milo's theory. Once Milo left, Zen turned to Trish and asked her to help him apply for the flow tower. Ordinary disciples of the flow sword sect could only enter the pagoda once a month, 2 hours at a time. But for elites like Zen, there was no limit to the number of times he could enter in a month. However, there was still a limit to the time he could stay inside the flow tower. Even elite disciples couldn't stay inside for over 4 hours at a time. If they stayed longer than that, the flame of soul would consume them completely. Among all the elites, only Zen and Milo were able to stay for a long period of time inside the tower. This was because, not only were they capable of instant enlightenment, but both of them also practiced the emotion-closing godly way. Zen's personal record in the flow tower was a whole day and night. Needless to say, the flow tower was a perfect place for comprehending flow swordsmanship. Turn your mind into a sword. Use your mind to kill hearts. Zen chanted softly from the 10th floor of the flow tower. The white cyclone in his mind began to whirl faster and faster. With a gentle flick of his fingers, he seemed to slice the very flames around him. To his satisfaction, in his hand was an invisible long sword, with a power unimaginable. Chapter 2816, Turning into Indigo Soul. Milo had once fought with Zen in the Dragon City. At that time, Milo held a dense mass of air in his hand, yet it was indestructible. It even broke the snow sword. That mass of air was actually a sword formed by Milo's thoughts. Milo didn't use all of his strength back then. Otherwise, I'm afraid that I would have failed to resist. Zen muttered to himself as he stared at the invisible long sword. The way the invisible long sword was formed was completely different from the power shaping of the might godly way. The sword was created by a warrior's mind, and could directly hit one's soul once it struck. The killing power that sword contained could easily destroy Zen's soul of light back then. Now Zen had already mastered the way to form a sword with his mind, and through the help of the truth enlightenment, his sword was probably more powerful than Milo's. And the only way to prove it was through a sword fight. Zen, of course, would not challenge Milo right now. He couldn't afford to waste his time. Zen had promised Yasmin that he'd go to the other shore as soon as he could, and now it was time. He immediately left the flow tower and returned to his own courtyard house quickly. Then he chose to cultivate in seclusion again. It only took a few moments for Zen to enter the other shore with his physical body. His soul of light had stepped into stage 4, while his body still stayed in stage 1. Luckily, Dorothy had shown him the way before, so it wasn't too difficult for his physical body to climb up to stage 4. As usual, he had attracted many surprised gazes on the way. It took Zen more than 10 hours to reach stage 4. Then his physical body safely retreated, and his soul returned to the other shore. Last time, Zen had retreated from the practice room of the temple, and now he went back to the same room. When Zen pushed the door open, another room's door was also opening. Although he hadn't seen the face, Zen was sure that the person from the other room was Dorothy. He had learned to identify her by her aura, which he had grown familiar with. "I've been waiting for you for a long time," Dorothy complained, but it was evident that she was glad to see him. Yasmin always kept her words. She held the high position only inferior to Eastern Emperor Thais in the Oneness Sky Palace. If she really wanted to give Soul Crystal to Zen, she could do it the way she wanted. However, after Zen returned to the Flow Sword sect, he didn't visit the temple first, and that made Dorothy upset. Despite that, she couldn't shake her optimistic nature, and her dissatisfaction only lasted for a short while. A moment later, she was already smiling at Zen while saying, "Come with me." This time, they were led by someone as they walked around the temple. Upgrading their souls of light into indigo souls required quite a lot of soul crystal. But as much as Zen could remember, the temple had only a small stock of soul crystal, didn't it? Zen was getting confused, so he asked Dorothy about it. But before Dorothy could even answer, their escort smiled at him and said confidently, "Since the day when someone discovered the other shore, the soul crystal has always been in great demand, but it doesn't mean that the Oneness Sky Palace doesn't have enough soul crystal at disposal." Near the entrance of the temple, every disciple of the Oneness Sky Palace could get some soul crystal. As for how much they could get, it depended on how much importance their sex attached to them. Whether it was the Oneness Mountain or the Origin Mountain, they had their own private savings of soul crystal. Yasmin and the other powerful figures could not come to the Lust World, so they couldn't use it. It was prepared for their direct descendants. Grandma only prepared the soul crystal that I need. So she went to borrow some from the Golden Mountain for you this time. Isn't she nice? Dorothy smiled at Zen, who was a little surprised at the news. Ha ha, it is a great favor, young man, their escort said in an envious tone. Of course, this person knew that fusing with that soul crystal was enough to let a warrior's soul of light turn into a powerful indigo soul. It meant the soul was raised to a higher level, which allowed the warrior to enter the desire world. Such an opportunity was so precious, and most people could only envy it. Please tell Madame Yasmin my sincere appreciation. I owe her big time, Zen said earnestly. Yet, until now, Zen's confusion hadn't been alleviated at all. What had happened between Madame Yasmin and Lady Flamen? Why would Madame Yasmin impose such a good thing on me all of a sudden? If she just wanted to win me over to her side, why would she go to such lengths? He wanted to ask Dorothy about it, but then he remembered that last time he mentioned Flamen and Elvinia, Dorothy immediately became weird. So he thought he might just look for the answer himself or find someone else to ask about it. The man led them to a covert place in the temple. It was heavily guarded with soldiers flanking each side of the doorway. Many runes were also engraved on the walls, from which Zen could feel powerful soul waves transmitting endlessly. Those runes must be used as a killing array to kill unwelcome souls. The soul crystal is ready. You two can go in now. Their escort stopped in front of a door, gesturing Zen and Dorothy to enter. The two went inside without hesitation. The room, as they'd observed, had a few small compartments. They each selected one, and instantly sat cross-legged, wasting no time. In a short while, drops of white light began to appear from the texture on the wall of the compartment, and a strong soul aura forced its way out. Zen did not hesitate. He reached out his hand, and with a gentle pull, the pure soul crystal flooded into his body. He could feel it slowly entering his soul of light. Buzz. As more and more white dots of light came in slowly, the souls of light of Zen and Dorothy were becoming stronger and stronger rapidly. Zen's soul was slightly stronger than Dorothy's when the two of them had just entered the Sea of Truth. Later on, they reached the first temple and absorbed a large ball of soul crystal together. With the help of that, they were able to reach the fourth stage of the other shore realm quicker than they'd anticipated. Then, the Flow Sword sect had given Zen a fist-sized chunk of soul crystal, bigger than others, so his soul of light had surpassed Dorothy's a lot. As Zen continuously absorbed the soul crystal into his body, the purple light of his soul of light started to shine brighter and more vividly. The white dots of light that emerged on the wall weren't shrinking or showing any signs of diminishing at all. On the contrary, more and more were actually appearing. About an hour later, the last piece of the soul crystal had merged with Zen's soul of light, which was glowing brightly with purple light. In that narrow space, Zen flapped his arms around, stretching, and got a test of his current stronger power. He threw a punch against the wall closest to him, and his fist collided with the wall with a strong force. His soul of light had changed completely. It was an entity on its own now. He felt like it was his own physical body that was on the other shore, instead of his soul. Dorothy had already climbed out of the narrow space a few moments ago, but she waited for Zen at the door. Her soul also emitted a stronger purple light now. After only an hour of absorbing the soul crystal, their aura had become much more powerful and imposing. For ordinary disciples, this would have been an unimaginable feat. Most of the disciples could only get the rare soul crystal when they had attained a great achievement or if they were willing to explore the temples that only a few people had set foot in. When Dorothy saw Zen exit the room, she came up to him before he could even greet her, and pinched his arm. After turning into Indigo Soul, she sensed her touch felt more real, and even her face became clearer. Although he couldn't see her clearly, Zen could feel that the edge of her soul had become sharper. I feel like I've changed my soul entirely. It feels kind of strange, Dorothy said, frowning. I'm still not used to it either, Zen answered with a smile, encouraging her. They then walked out of that place together, feeling more powerful and confident. But just as they had reached the entrance of the temple, throngs of souls of light started rushing in, and they were all screaming. Chapter 2817, Soul Snakes. Dorothy stopped one of them and asked, "What happened?" "The Bering race is coming to take revenge," the man answered. "They released the snakes." "Snakes? What snakes?" Zen looked aghast. "The soul snakes raised by the Bering race," Dorothy answered with a frown. "How dare they use snakes to attack us? Let's go out and have a look." They rushed out of the temple, but black creatures suddenly blocked their path. Zen stared at the creatures closely. They were black snakes, but he couldn't see any other details on them. In fact, they could only see the appearance and details of the aboriginal inhabitants clearly on the other shore. The souls of light and even Zen's body were outsiders to the other shore, and others could only trace out the outlines of them. The snakes were brought to the other shore by the Bering race, so he naturally couldn't see them clearly. "The snakes are coming. Return to the temple quickly." "Dang it, does the Bering race want to attack the Oneness Sky Palace's temple?" Resentment filled the voices of the Oneness Sky Palace disciples. Swish, swish, swish. Suddenly, many soul snakes were cut in half. These disciples were in a panic. Some of them fled, while the others pulled out their swords and began to deal with the snakes. The Oneness Sky Palace disciples were all powerful. The souls of light glowed purple light. This meant they were in the 9th or 10th stage of the other shore realm and soon would become indigo souls. But still, they were weaker than the group of soul snakes in front of them. They kept on cutting and cutting, but, in the end, they had to retreat to the entrance of the temple. "Are these soul snakes planning to break into our temple?" Zen wondered out loud. Dorothy shook her head calmly. "I don't think so," she replied. Despite the small conflicts between the Bering race and the Oneness Sky Palace throughout the years, they never launched an all-out attack. If the Bering race decided to break into the temple, then that would signal an all-out war between the two races. "Help!" A sharp scream was heard not too far away. Zen and Dorothy turned their attention towards the noise and saw 4 people surrounded by snakes. The 4 people's souls were still light brown and their breaths were a little messy. Obviously, they had just stepped into the 4th stage of the other shore realm. They were simply trying to return to the temple, but the snakes had them surrounded. They had tried their best to fight against the snakes, but were then losing power. They were no match for the snakes. They would die sooner or later. Why didn't they leave the other shore? Zen was curious. Souls of light could simply choose to depart the other shore. Anyone in the right mind would definitely resort to leaving at the sight of the soul snakes. "Look at their feet," Dorothy prodded. There were faint blue lights that shone underneath the feet of the 4 people. Members of large races had been cultivating in the other shore for many years. They were able to develop various methods that entrapped souls of light in the other shore. This included the soul binding thread that tied people's souls into the place. The technique was popular among the Bering race. It looked like the 4 disciples had fallen into a dead end. "I'll rescue them," Zen announced as he darted forward. He twisted his arm and a sharp thorn flew through it. The thorn shone purple, indicating Zen's soul was much stronger than the soul snakes. Quickly, he attacked the snakes and had dozens of snakes cut into pieces. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Dorothy joined Zen and fought the snakes as well. A small soul sword appeared around her, ready to cut any snake that came near Dorothy. They cut a path in the middle of the snakes and rushed towards the 4 people. The 4 warriors were trembling. They had entered the other shore a few years ago, and now they reached the 4th stage of the other shore realm. They were diligent and outstanding disciples in the Oneness Sky Palace. They were not prepared to die right there and then. They were close to breaking down when surging soul waves suddenly came into light. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The soul snakes were swept up, thrown all over, and cut like straws. 2 souls of light shining with purple lights landed beside them. What powerful soul fluctuations! Oh my goodness! The indigo souls! They are indigo souls! Sophia, were finally rescued. Tears of joy swelled in their eyes. Sophia had her eyes fixed on one of the souls. A sense of familiarity lingered in her mind. "We can't stay here," Zen said hastily. "Return to the temple quickly." Then, he walked past Sophia, blocking the surging snakes. Zen and Dorothy were as sharp as ever. Their teamwork made them invincible. Each time the waves of snakes crashed towards them, they simply flicked their swords and split them apart. "Sophia, run! What's wrong with you? Run!" Sophia felt someone tug at her arms. When she realized what was happening, she quickly followed them and rushed toward the temple. Zen and Dorothy stood behind and continued fighting back. Each time they launched an attack, they also inched backwards. Slowly, they were retreating to the entrance of the temple. When they finally reached the entrance, the soul snakes suddenly stopped attacking. They stopped. Zen asked in confusion. As if on cue, all the soul snakes just abruptly halted and stopped at the entrance. They know their line. They know that as soon as they enter the temple, they'd be in Oneness Sky Palace's territory. Crossing the line would be as good as declaring war against the Oneness Sky Palace. This is the rule signed by all the races in the Source World, Dorothy explained. All of the great powers had established their own temples within the other shore. The Source World was already filled with wars, no one wanted the same for the other shore. Thus, everyone agreed that none of them were allowed to attack each other's temple. No race would cross boundaries unless they had the intention of wiping out the other. In the past, the Bering race invaded the Nine Li race's temple. This triggered a great war between the two races. Soon, the Nine Li race was exterminated. We can't just let the soul snakes block our path, Zen remarked. The soul snakes swarmed the entrance of the temple. They even covered the sculpture in front of it. The Oneness Sky Palace disciples trembled in fear. Hiss, hiss. The soul snakes seemed agitated. Suddenly, they cleared a path and made way for 3 warriors. The warriors strolled over and stopped in front of the temple. What's going on? Is the Bering race planning to start a war? Dorothy asked the warriors arrogantly. The Bering race had plenty of powerful warriors among them, but the Oneness Sky Palace was far from an inferior race. If war erupted between them, the Oneness Sky Palace could summon back all the warriors in Stage 13 of Lust World. It would be a great fight and it would be difficult to predict who the winner would be. Chapter 2818, The Cause of the Whole Thing. The 3 men from the Bering race paid Dorothy no heed. Their leader gently raised his hand. The soul snakes raised their heads attentively, their thread-like tongues darting in and out. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Dorothy trembled slightly. Then, the man said, "Call Milo Mo from your Oneness Sky Palace over to receive his death." Hearing this, the Oneness Sky Palace disciples exchanged confused glances. Milo, a disciple cried in surprise. He came to the temple a few days ago, but we haven't seen him in a while, someone chirped. Several days ago, he challenged some disciples from the Bering race, another added. Did he cause any trouble? Dorothy's brows knitted. She was puzzled. No one had expected this predicament had anything to do with Milo. Zen, isn't Milo also a member of the Flow Sword sect? Have you seen him recently? She asked in a low voice. I did see him, Zen admitted. Then what happened? Dorothy asked curiously. Zen shook his head. I don't know exactly what happened, but I guess he might have hurt someone important from the Bering race, and now they're trying to take revenge. Although Zen had no idea what had happened exactly, Milo had disclosed to him about a great breakthrough in the flow swordsmanship. He had eagerly practiced what he discovered on some unfortunate souls on the other shore. After all, the best place to practice the flow swordsmanship without holding back was on the other shore. Milo had also specifically said that he had beaten many rivals and even the Bering race was afraid of him. Zen was afraid that Milo might have bullied the Bering race on the other shore. So the disciples from the Bering race were going to seek revenge today. Nevertheless, Zen and Milo were both from the Flow Sword sect. He took a step forward. Milo is my fellow disciple. May I ask what he's done to offend you? Yesterday he almost killed my younger brother in the soul arena. My brother is still in a coma today. I would like to face the man who did this. The man said in a cold voice. The soul arena was an open field that stood in the middle of the 3 temples of the human race. Souls of light would go here to compete against one another, to determine the strength of their souls. Oh, this is so trivial, Dorothy said in an annoyed tone. A soul battle is likely to cause accidents. Since your brother chose to enter the soul arena, he should have been aware of the risks. Yet you have the nerve to demand for an explanation. Many had lost their lives in the soul arena. Anyone who entered knew their fate would be determined by the strength of their souls. Who said I am here to ask for an explanation? He sneered. He should have known he wouldn't get away with this so easily. If he doesn't come out to fight me, I won't let you go. The snakes hissed ominously. Zen surveyed his surroundings. Everywhere he turned, hordes of snakes blocked his way. Even the gate of the temple was swarmed with the vicious creatures, no one could go in or out. The Oneness Sky Palace was in for a lot of trouble if this kept up. What should we do? Shall we go get Milo? In terms of strength and status, the Bering race was indeed more powerful than the Oneness Sky Palace. Although the Oneness Sky Palace disciples were angry with the situation, it seemed they had no choice. Some of the warriors quietly left the other shore and delivered the news to the Oneness Sky Palace. Sophia and her 3 companions looked at Zen silently. This man is from the Flow Sword sect, the man next to Sophia said in a low voice. I heard that the Flow Sword sect's talent, Milo, is capable of instant enlightenment. But this is not Milo. Could he be Connor? I have seen Connor before, another man answered, puzzled. That can't be him. Looking Zen up and down, Sophia was filled with confusion. She couldn't shake off the feeling that she'd met him before. His aura and voice were exactly the same as those of the man she had met on the Sea of Truth. That man could swim in the Sea of Truth. Could this be the same guy? Among the people of the Oneness Sky Palace, it was Sophia and her companions who had first found out that someone could swim in the Sea of Truth. After all, they had witnessed it themselves. But since then, she had never run into Zen again. But that person hadn't been a member of the Oneness Sky Palace at the time. Why was he a member now? Sophia's mind buzzed with so many questions. On the outside, however, she tried to remain composed. Deciding not to tell her companions the truth, she just shook her head to drop the subject. The horde of snakes continued to block the entrance of the temple. The three men from the Bering race were stubborn. They weren't going to leave till they faced Milo. Suddenly, a man appeared inside the temple. Strolling past the crowd to face the three men, he said, "Didn't I tell you I would go to the Soul Arena 3 days from then? Why are you so impatient?" He smiled. Of course, who else could it be but Milo? A faint purple light flashed on his soul of light. Although it wasn't as bright as Zen's and Dorothy's, people could tell it was not that far from reaching the Indigo Soul. It seemed the Flow Sword sect was offering him many resources. "You are Milo Mo?" asked the leading warrior of the Bering race with a snort. "Yes, I am," replied Milo calmly. "Do you dare to enter the Soul Arena and fight me?" The man continued, baring his teeth. "Why not?" "But," Milo gestured at the snakes. "Get rid of that garbage." The man did not refuse. Raising his right hand, a bright silver halo appeared. Reaching into the halo, he pulled out a brown pot. Then, he pointed the mouth of the pot at the black soul snakes. Whoosh, 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 all the soul snakes transformed into pools of black light that the pot seemed to suck in. In the blink of an eye, all the soul snakes that blocked the entrance of temple had disappeared. The disciples in the temple heaved a sigh of relief. While they were glad the matter didn't escalate, they were worried for their companion, Milo. The three souls of light of the Bering race were Indigo souls. Indigo souls could try to surpass the Lust world. After they finished the Chaotic Source reinforcement, they would be promoted to Chaotic Source Realm warriors. Milo's soul was undeniably a bit weaker than that of the leading disciple of the Bering race. "I've heard that Milo is capable of instant enlightenment," a disciple whispered. "No wonder he is a rare genius in the Oneness Sky Palace. He doesn't seem to be nervous at all. Unfortunately his soul is a little weaker," another one said wistfully. "Really? I don't think so. A few days ago, he defeated 3 Indigo souls from the Bering race all by himself." The man who had summoned back the soul snakes put away the pot and gestured towards the arena. Without a word, Milo followed them. Although they had been filled with fear just minutes prior, curiosity overcame the disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace. They too wordlessly followed Milo and the men to the arena. By now, the news had spread so quickly, permeating the depths of the Oneness Sky Palace. The normal disciples, elite disciples, and the direct descendants of the various mountain heads visited the other shore, streaming out of the temple gate. It seemed the interest of the entire Oneness Sky Palace was piqued. "Let's go and have a look too," Dorothy said excitedly. It was not a trivial matter anymore. While many disciples of the Bering race had died in the Soul Arena, no one had dared to block the entrance of the Oneness Sky Palace's temple before. To a certain extent, this somewhat represented the true attitude of the Bering race. Zen had just become an Indigo soul. Originally, he had wanted to go to stage 13 of the other shore with Dorothy, and perhaps he could find another shore token that was suitable for the truth of cultivation nature. He didn't expect such a thing to happen before he could do so. With a sigh, he followed after Dorothy. Chapter 2819, An Unexpected Bet. Zen and Dorothy followed the crowd, heading for the back of the Oneness Sky Palace's temple. A square platform was situated at the intersection of 3 temples. This was known as the Soul Arena. The surface of the arena was covered all over with a layer of pale blue powder, which was made of the same material as the soul binding thread. The powder was used to enforce an important rule. A fighter in the Soul Arena was not allowed to leave the other shore. Otherwise, when one was losing, they could simply leave the battle. The powder ensured that warriors who participated in the fight could not just escape. "Why are there so many people here?" Zen asked, glancing at the crowd of warriors around the arena. A large number of people were gathered around the soul arena, and all of them were strong souls of light. Many shone with vivid purple light, indicating that they were indigo souls. The situation is getting more and more strange, Dorothy said with a frown. Most people came to the other shore primarily to search for suitable other shore tokens. Many were not even interested in the soul battles. Although the soul arena had been established here for a long time, it simply wasn't very popular among warriors. Now, however, the arena was surrounded with warriors. The people of the Bearing race were present, and the members of the Divine Farmer race were also in the crowd. When there were still 4 great human forces, it was the time when humans had forged the strongest unity. The Bearing race couldn't have wiped out the 9 Li race on their own. They succeeded because they allied with the Divine Farmer race to deal with the people of the 9 Li race. The cooperation between the Bearing race and the Divine Farmer race had long been a source of some concern to the Oneness Sky Palace. But because the Bearing race and the Oneness Sky Palace were quite distant from each other geographically, the palace was placated and generally existed in harmony with both the Bearing race and Divine Farmer race. Yet Athamar's prediction held true. The Oneness Sky Palace would eventually clash with the Bearing race, and the 2 races would turn against each other. Seamus G, the man who had previously driven the surge of snakes, stepped onto the soul arena. The crowd quieted as they focused their attention on him. He waited until everyone was listening, and then said in a loud voice, "Yesterday, 10 men of the Bearing race were defeated one after another. My younger brother was one of those men. He sustained soul damage in the fight, and he still hasn't awakened. On behalf of my brother, I challenge the warrior who defeated him, Milo Mo." As soon as Seamus G stopped talking, a clamor rose up from the members of the Bearing race. Their souls of light emitted powerful auras, displaying quite intimidating strength. Milo stepped up onto the soul arena. He showed no sign of fear. Nonchalantly, he said, "No need to talk so much. If you want to fight, then let's fight." "Wait," said Seamus G coldly. "It is tradition to place bets on the outcome of battles in the soul arena. Today is no exception." "You want to bet?" Milo said impatiently. "Fine, how about I bet 1,000 soul pills on my victory?" To an ordinary disciple of the Oneness Sky Palace, 1,000 soul pills were a lot. But to Milo and Seamus G, it was an insignificant amount. The perfunctory offer made it clear that Milo had no interest in betting. Seamus G understood this, and he scowled fiercely. 1,000 soul pills is not enough. He turned and gestured to a man behind him. At his command, the man stepped forward, taking out a large, transparent ball from his Sumeru space. The sight of the huge, shining ball elicited cries of astonishment from the people around the soul arena. "The soul crystal, that's a large chunk of soul crystal. Oh my goodness, is Seamus really going to bet the soul crystal?" Zen and Dorothy, who had been watching the exchange between Seamus G and Milo, were stunned. Soul crystal was an extremely precious object. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible to buy it even with large amounts of divine crystals or soul pills. Soul crystal was priceless. The soul crystal in the transparent, shining ball was enough to transform a warrior's soul into an indigo soul. Any warrior would fight hard to obtain the soul crystal, which was even larger than the one Zen had absorbed in the temple just now. "Is it worth it? Why would he risk such a large chunk of soul crystal?" Dorothy asked curiously. Zen was also deep in thought. He couldn't fathom where the soul crystal had come from. Regardless of Seamus G's rank in the Bearing race, he shouldn't have such a large chunk of soul crystal. And if he did, he shouldn't be able to risk losing it all on a rash bet. What was his intention here? Milo had been utterly disinterested in betting, but at the sight of the soul crystal, his face lit up with excitement. He had yet to become an indigo soul yet. Winning this bet would dramatically accelerate that process. Yet his next words were unexpected. His face turned serious again as he said to Seamus G, "It seems this battle cannot continue." "Why not?" Seamus G demanded, his own expression darkening. Milo laughed bitterly. "Your bet is too precious. I can't match it. I don't have such a large chunk of soul crystal." He wondered if Seamus G would insist on pushing through with the battle, since the difference in value between 1,000 soul pills and that huge chunk of soul crystal was so vast. To his surprise, Seamus G waved his hand and said curtly, "It doesn't matter. Let me finish what I have to say. Although I am betting this chunk of soul crystal, it's not easy to get it." He turned once more to his people and made another gesture, at which 2 members of the Bearing race stepped forward. These 2 souls of light emitted cold, powerful auras. They were obviously very strong even among the indigo souls. 3 of us will challenge the people of the Oneness Sky Palace. 2 people will fight at a time, one from the Bearing race and one from the Oneness Sky Palace. Anytime someone is defeated, another must take his place. If all three of us lose, the soul crystal will be given to the last one Sky Palace disciple standing, said Seamus G. His proposal caught the interest of many of the disciples around the arena. If someone fought against the three warriors alone, it would be quite difficult. But Seamus G was offering to let them take turns fighting against their three warriors until all of them were defeated. Many thought to themselves, if I am the one who defeats the last of the three, then I will win the soul crystal. But Milo quickly dashed everyone's plan. You don't need to say anything more, he told Seamus G. No one else will get the chance to fight. I can beat all three of you alone. Seamus G sneered at him, and then walked out of the soul arena. He motioned for one of his men to step up. Dion, you will be the first to fight Milo. Without hesitation, Dion G leapt into the soul arena. There was a hiss of sound, and 6 purple soul rings appeared above his head. His cold, powerful indigo soul sent out a strong aura across the soul arena, and weaker souls of light trembled at its force. Milo smiled faintly. His own soul of light emanated in the arena, wisps of white light that swept out and formed a small whirlpool which emitted a bold, sharp intent. What a strong truth aura! Dorothy exclaimed, gazing at the shining white whirlpool of light. Zen smiled. Can't you figure out the origin of the white light? Dorothy thought for a moment and then responded, that's the truth enlightenment. How could he combine it with his soul theurgy so soon? She had practiced the first 150 words of the truth enlightenment, and thus was able to recognize the origin of the white vortex. It is, Zen nodded. I'm not sure yet either. Maybe Milo had mastered it in such a short period of time because the first 100-odd words of the truth enlightenment were a perfect match of the flow strike. In contrast, the origin swordsmanship practiced by Dorothy was not a soul theurgy, and she hadn't gone deep into this aspect. It was not easy to combine the two, perhaps it would have to be done by her grandmother. Swoosh! In an instant, the white light released by Milo had vanished, and in its place, an invisible sharp sword appeared, rushing rapidly towards Dion G. Chapter 2820, Purpose. The G clan was one of the 2 large clans of the Bearing race. The soul rings that Dion practiced were tough indeed. Thanks to his soul rings, he was able to do as he pleased on stage 13. However, that didn't stop Milo from trying. He shot out his mind sword, slashing through the 3 soul rings on the outer layer. Dion's face fell. Seamus had warned him not to underestimate Milo, yet he was still surprised. Dion was ranked part of the top 10 among the younger generation of the G clan. He had inherited some of the unique skills of the clan. The audiences were stunned. Would he be defeated in one strike? With a snarl, he reactivated his soul force, summoning more soul rings to spread out and protect him. When Milo's second mind sword attacked him again, he leapt to the side, dodging the blade by a hair. Milo still remained calm. Since he had mastered the truth enlightenment, he was confident in the power of the heart-slaughtering strike. With this power, he might even be able to kill a warrior at the chaotic source realm. Of course, this would only be possible if the warrior of the chaotic source realm had just cultivated their soul to the indigo soul level. After all, after one had the indigo soul, they could improve further with enough soul crystal. Whoosh! An idea flashed through his mind and the invisible mind sword began to hover in the air. With a slight smile, he controlled the sword to slash at Dion again. Dion didn't dare face him head-on, and he swiveled to the side to dodge the slash. Moving as flexibly as a snake, he pounced from side to side, narrowly dodging Milo's strikes. However, the space of the soul arena was limited. After several dodges, he was trapped in a corner. Milo slowly headed towards him, taking his sweet time. Milo continued slashing at him with his invisible mind sword, his eyes flashing in anticipation. Finally, all the soul rings were shattered into thousands of pieces. Milo pointed his sword at Dion's soul. Dion immediately raised his hand in surrender. Milo knew when to stop. Withdrawing his mind sword, he walked away from the trembling Dion. Milo is truly amazing, Dorothy praised, nodding in approval. Although her soul of light had improved a lot, she knew that if she were to fight Dion in the soul arena, it wouldn't be so easy for her to win. Zen nodded in agreement. Somehow, even though Milo's soul strength was nowhere near as strong as Dion, he had managed to destroy him without breaking a sweat. If Milo's soul succeeded in turning into an indigo soul, his power would be unimaginable. Zen was deep in thought. From the way Milo ended the fight, it didn't look like he was a bloodthirsty killer, killing for killing's sake. The second Dion admitted defeat, he stopped his attacks. So why did Seamus claim that Milo almost killed his younger brother? Zen's thoughts were interrupted as the crowd erupted into cheer. Milo won the battle so easily. Is the fight over? I just got here. I heard that the Bearing race gambled Soul Crystal on this match. Because of the news about soul snakes swarming the Oneness Sky Palace's temple, many of the elite disciples had come to the other shore to see what was happening. Just now, Dion had taken out the soul crystal, causing the audience to whisper amongst themselves excitedly. More and more disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace started showing up. Apparently, the disciples that had just come were only here for the soul crystal, and most of them were elites from the Oneness Sky Palace. After Dion's swift defeat, he left the soul arena dejectedly. The audience held their breath in anticipation, waiting for the next warrior to step onto the arena, but no one came. Standing in the middle of the soul arena, hands clasped behind his back, Milo grew impatient. Seamus, you said you'd send 3 people to fight me. Where is the second one? Milo saw Seamus whispering to his group under the stage. Suddenly, Seamus's once arrogant disposition changed into one of respect. Please wait a while, he said courteously with a charismatic smile. As the clock ticked, the crowd grew restless in anticipation. Are the Bearing race afraid now? Milo is really strong. The power of the flow strike is incredible. But Seamus wouldn't go back on his own words, would he? If he really flinches and backs out, that would be a huge disgrace. Ha ha ha. People from the Oneness Sky Palace laughed amongst themselves, confident in Milo's abilities. However, the disciples from the Bearing race kept quiet, no one tried to defend themselves. After a while, Seamus finally spoke up, okay, I'm done making arrangements. Rex, it's your turn to face Milo. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, a warrior from the Bearing race stepped onto the soul arena. And just like that, the second battle began. Rex G was a little stronger than Dion. No one knew what kind of soul theurgy he had cultivated, but every time Milo slashed at him with the mind sword, Rex flitted away with ease, as though he were as light as a feather. Zen's brows furrowed. This wasn't a fight, this was just a game of cat and mouse. It looked as though Rex G had no intention of attacking. He continued to tirelessly dodge Milo's strikes, darting around the arena like a graceful gazelle. Are you here to fight me? Or are you just here to run away? Milo asked impatiently, his nostrils flaring. Rex G seemed unbothered by Milo's taunts. He floated about the arena, indifferent to Milo's attacks. It seemed that he still didn't plan to seriously fight the battle. Okay, fine. Milo raised his eyebrows, evidently exerting more effort now. The white truth aura spun more violently around him, the mind sword crashing down at an incredible speed. As Milo attacked with all his strength, Rex G's expression changed to that of worry. Suddenly, his dodges were less graceful, until he was cornered, just like his predecessor. Throwing his hands up immediately, Rex G admitted defeat, too. Get out of here. Milo waved his hand impatiently. He knitted his brows, wondering what trick Seamus was playing. How could he have sent a warrior to play hide and seek with him? This is the last round. Are you going to send someone from your race, or will you fight me yourself? Milo called out to Seamus. Seamus surveyed the soul arena. Multitudes of souls of light flashed purple around the arena. It seemed most of the elites of the Oneness Sky Palace had gathered there. A look of satisfaction crept on his face as he strode confidently to the center of the arena. You dawdled for 2 hours. Milo mocked. Don't tell me you're going to go back on your words. Milo crossed his arms over his chest to assert dominance. Seamus's face broke into an even wider smile. Anyway, people on the other shore couldn't see each other's expressions. He said, go back on my words. The petty soul crystal is nothing compared to the lives of more than half of the elite disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace. He threw his head back and laughed maniacally. Almost all the elite disciples on stage 4 had come to the other shore. Only a small part who were exploring on stage 12 and stage 13 were still on the way here. But Seamus thought the number of warriors that had gathered here was enough. Milo's expression changed. What do you mean? Dorothy and Zen exchanged anxious glances. They felt that something was wrong from the beginning, and only now did they finally realize what was going on. It was all an elaborate trap. Seamus only wanted to gather the elite disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace in one place and kill them off. Dorothy gasped. Was Seamus crazy? Retreat. Zen shouted as he grabbed Dorothy and flew backwards. Although he didn't know what tricks Seamus had under his sleeve, he didn't want to wait to find out. All the disciples who had come to watch were unprepared for an ambush. Anxious cries rose from the crowd. Seamus continued to laugh hysterically. He and his men had been plotting this for a long time, they were ready for any type of response. Buzz. Seamus raised his hands higher. Out of nowhere, soul-binding threads burst forth from the ground in a 10,000-foot radius around the soul arena, coiling around the ankles of each and every soul of light present. While this didn't restrict their movement, they were tied to the other shore and could not leave there.